golden light of the African morning stretched like sweet honey across the vast Mara mud flats, turning the dry grass into glistening ribbons. It was a perfect start to the day, a rare moment of tranquility where nature expressed its benevolence. At the center of this scene was Kira, a lioness with a sandy mane, her eyes sharp yet holding the composure of a leader. She was a symbol of raw strength and wild beauty. But to Zola, her energetic cub, she was simply mother. Today, Kira was teaching Zola about sense, about listening to the echoes of life and death on the savannah. Zola, with his inexhaustible energy, scampered eagerly behind her, when a brilliant butterfly fluttered near the edge of a muddy puddle, the boundary between dry land and the wet abyss. Zola's curiosity surged. The cub ran faster, darting toward the danger zone. Kira recognized the silent threat too late. With a blazing instinct to protect her child, she lunged. It was an act of absolute courage, but also a terrible mistake. Just as she was about to grab Zola, the soft ground beneath her front paws gave way. A heavy splat echoed, and the majestic body of the queen of the savannah crashed down. Kira didn't fall on grass. She plunged straight into the thick, black mud. The violent impact stunned her, and immediately, the vicious mud began to constrict. Zola stopped, eyes wide with horror, a raw, tiny cry escaping his throat. Kira tried to use her sheer muscle power, but with every struggle, the mud swallowed her deep. The morning sunlight suddenly felt cold. Death had appeared in its most silent and terrifying form, the swamp. Kira's mighty body was imprisoned, and her hope now rested only in the desperate eyes of her son. Time on the Mara mud flats passed slowly, harshly, like the very mud flow constricting Kira. She no longer heard the laughter of the savannah or the cheerful chirping of birds. Now, there was only the sound of the mud swallowing her. Her extraordinary strength, the pride of top predator, had become useless. Every time Kira tensed her muscles, she felt the gluey mud clutch tighter around her belly and hips, dragging her down another few inches. The initial panic had given way to exhaustion and intense pain. Zola, the cub, was on the bank just meters from his mother, but the distance felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Zola whimpered, letting out high-pitched, desperate cries, a plea only his mother could understand. He scratched at the bank, as if trying to claw away the mud holding Kira captive with his tiny paws, but his efforts were futile. Zola did not leave. He had become the silent guardian of his mother's prison. From a distance, a few members of the pride, perhaps drawn by the noise and the scent of danger, peered out from the bushes. But upon witnessing Kira's tragic sight and her terrible helplessness before the mud, cold survival instinct prevailed. They let out a faint warning growl, then quickly retreated into the shadows of the trees, leaving Kira and Zola alone to face the lurking death. The sun climbed to its zenith, the temperature soaring, turning the mud pit into a humid, suffocating steam oven. Waves of heat rose, carrying the heavy, pungent odor of damp earth, rotting roots, and evaporating mud. Kira's breathing became labored. Her breaths were shallow and rapid, her eyes beginning to droop with despair and exhaustion. She knew time was the enemy, and she was losing the war. After one last struggle, Kira stopped. She no longer thrashed. A horrifying calm settled over her. Kira looked at Zola, her eyes no longer showing panic, but instead conveying a deep, silent message. My son survived. By remaining still, she chose to preserve her last bit of energy, accepting fate if no miracle occurred. She transmitted a wordless farewell, a painful surrender, forcing Zola to witness his mother's life or death moment under the scorching sun and the cruel indifference of the savannah. The mud prison had won. Zola collapsed on the bank's edge, his head resting on his front paws, his eyes glistening with desperate tears never leaving his mother. The cub was exhausted, parched, but a small, fierce love compelled him to stay, silently roaring, hoping a miracle would appear from the void. The sun began its descent from the peak, but for Zola, time stood still. He had been there for hours, the exhaustion almost paralyzing his small body, yet his spirit remained resilient. His throat was raw from crying out, his stomach gnawing with hunger. Zola knew he should find water, find shelter, but an invisible, powerful thread, the bond of maternal love, held him rooted. He could not abandon Kira, even as she kept her eyes closed in despair. He lay stretched on the sand, surrounded only by silence and the foul smell of mud. Amidst that seemingly endless stillness, a strange, distant sound suddenly pierced the hot air. It was a steady rumble, completely different from a lion's roar or the sounds of the savannah. The sound of a patrolling jeep engine. Kira didn't move, but Zola, as if electrified, sprang up. He pointed his sharp ears toward the sound, and a faint glimmer of hope, the last instinct of survival, flashed in his tear-filled eyes. He knew, by pure intuition, that this was his mother's last chance. Zola left his mother, running frantically toward the dusty road. An olive-green jeep appeared after a curve, carrying Elias and Ben, two experienced rangers returning to the station after a long shift. They were chatting comfortably until a small, trembling yet utterly determined silhouette dashed into the middle of the road. Elias, the driver, slammed on the brakes. Both men were stunned. A cub, completely alone, without his mother or protective pride, was blocking their vehicle. Zola's eyes, through the windshield, were not a threat, but a wordless plea. Those eyes conveyed a terrible desperation that human language could not express. Elias, with over 2 decades of experience in reserve, instantly understood. He looked at Ben, who nodded back with a serious expression. "He wants us to follow him," Ben whispered. Zola wasted not a second. As the jeep slowly started rolling, the cub ran ahead, constantly looking back to ensure the 2 men were still following. The jeep patiently trailed Zola's small paw prints, cutting through the tall grass, moving deeper into the forbidden area of the swamp. Finally, past a thick clump of trees, the horrifying scene unfolded before their eyes. Kira, with only her mud-caked head emerging from the sludge. She was motionless, almost a monument to despair. Elias and Ben exchanged a grim look. This mudflat was notoriously a death trap, and rescuing a deeply trapped adult lioness was an incredibly dangerous task. But looking back at the trembling Zola standing next to them, they knew they couldn't turn away. The cub's courage had compelled the men to intervene. Zola's desperation was transformed into the cool, professional determination of Elias and Ben. The 2 rangers wasted no time in expressing astonishment. They immediately set about assessing the risk. The muddy area was unstable, and the lioness was deeply trapped. They knew well that Kira's panic could endanger everyone. "We need to calm her down," Elias told Ben, his voice steady but firm. They took out the tranquilizer gun, but it was a light dose, not to completely incapacitate, but to lessen her panic and keep Kira safe during the extraction. Elias aimed carefully. The tranquilizer dart gently landed in Kira's shoulder. They waited for a few tense minutes, observing Kira's breathing gradually deepen and stabilize. Once Kira had calmed, Ben began to walk along the bank, carrying thick wooden planks. He laid them down on the mud surface, creating a narrow pathway, a temporary bridge between the dry world and the death trap. This act was not merely technical, but a symbol of human intervention, forging an exit where nature had closed every door. Meanwhile, Zola stood a distance away on a higher mound of earth, observing every action. The cub was completely silent, as if fearing that a small sound could break the miracle unfolding. Elias secured a thick nylon rope and stepped slowly onto the wooden planks. Every step he took had to be cautious, as the mud still trembled under his weight. Approaching Kira, Elias began the rope-tying maneuver. He carefully threaded the rope around her chest, behind her front legs, completely avoiding the neck area to prevent further injury or choking. He tied a solid knot, reinforced with absolute respect for her strength. The rope was connected to the winch hook of the Jeep. Ben operated the winch. The Jeep's engine began to hum gently, gradually, The rope tautened like a bowstring, and both Elias and Ben held their breath. The mud let out a horrible squelch, like a living creature being deprived of its prey. Kira's body began to move, slowly, carving a deep furrow in the mud surface. Every inch gained was a victory. It felt like pulling out a mountain. Finally, after minutes of tense struggle, Kira's body was pulled out of the mud suction. She lay sprawled on the hard ground, safe but utterly exhausted and covered in black mud. Elias and Ben breathed a sigh of relief, a gentle smile appearing on their dust-caked faces. The rescue operation was successful, thanks to Zola's courage and the gentle, compassionate strength of the humans. Kira lay on the bank, her body still but her breathing steady. Zola didn't wait long. The cub rushed to his mother, rubbing his head against Kira's mud-caked face, letting out soft whimpers as if comforting her. Elias and Ben quickly poured water from their jerrycans to wash away the thick, dried mud on Kira's back and legs, checking her vital signs one last time. They placed a large piece of fresh meat right next to Kira and retreated to the jeep, giving the mother and son their private space. They understood that their presence had fulfilled its role, and now it was time for nature to heal itself. The most critical moment arrived. Kira's ears twitched, then her eyes slowly opened. Her first glance settled on Zola, then swept across the dried mud remaining on her fur, and finally, she looked toward the two men standing silently by the jeep. There was no growl, no fear or hostility, only a deep, lingering gaze, a connection that transcended species boundaries, a silent understanding of gratitude. Ben and Elias simply smiled, a tired but deeply satisfied smile. Gradually, the effects of the tranquilizer faded. Kira shakily rose, lightly shaking her mane. She turned to Zola, using her tongue to lick clean the mud clinging to her son's coat, the familiar act of maternal love reestablished. Everything had returned to its proper place. She took a deep breath, surveyed her surroundings, then gently lowered her head to eat the fresh meat left by her rescuers. Zola ate beside his mother, occasionally glancing toward the jeep, seemingly to thank the strange guests who had brought life back to his family. After recovering, Kira looked toward the savannah. She did not return to the pride, but chose a new direction, carrying the lesson of fragility and kindness. Kira and Zola began to walk. They walked with steady, newly strong steps. But before disappearing into the bushes, Kira turned her head back. Her gaze lingered once more on Elias and Ben. That wordless farewell was the most powerful testimony to this story. Elias and Ben smiled, starting the jeep's engine. They knew this story was more than just a rescue. It was powerful evidence that compassion is a phenomenal force capable of mending everything. Their professionalism, respect, and use of gentle solutions had not only saved an individual, but had also restored faith in the harmony between humans and the wild. The story of Kira and Zola is a story of hope. It reminds us that even in the harshest wild world, there is still room for connection and courage. If this story has touched your heart, please share it to spread belief in the silent yet extraordinary work of rangers like Elias and Ben. Support conservation efforts, because sometimes all a creature needs is a gentle, timely help. Comment below, which moment touched you the most? "12 years ago, in the heart of the magnificent Masai Mara National Reserve, a promise was made. It was not a promise spoken in words, but in a look, a dying mother's final plea to a stranger. This sacred promise forged a bond so deeply illogical that it defied every law of the wild. Meet Eleanor Vance. She is a woman who traded a quiet life for the beauty and chaos of conservation work. For years after that fateful moment, everyone around her told her, the wild will erase the memory. The lion will forget. But what happens when the memory of love is stronger than the jungle's survival instinct? Today, Eleanor, at 70, has returned to the Masai Mara. And hidden out, there is a magnificent male lion named Kalen, dubbed the Golden King of the Mara. Kalen was once her tiny cub, raised on hope and lullabies. In this vast, unforgiving landscape, can a love that transcends species and time survive? Prepare for a moment that changes everything we thought we knew about connection and loyalty. This is the story of Eleanor and the King's Embrace. In 2013, Eleanor Vance wasn't looking for a family. She was documenting conservation challenges near the Masai Mara. As a seasoned wildlife expert, she had witnessed hardship and heartbreak, but nothing could have prepared her for the tragic scene that unfolded on that scorching afternoon. Her jeep stopped, the golden dust settled, and the guide pointed toward a clearing. Lying there was a graceful lioness, tragically wounded by poachers. As life drained from her amber eyes, she performed one final, desperate act, using her last strength to nudge her tiny, whimpering cub toward Eleanor's vehicle. It was a transfer of trust, a mother choosing hope over surrender to instinct. Despite every warning, Eleanor stepped out. She approached not as a scientist or a tourist, but as a fellow creature. Tears streamed down her face as she silently accepted the lioness's plea, picking up the fragile cub, weighing less than 3 pounds. She named him Kalen, a name that sounded both ancient and noble. The first days were a blur of sleep deprivation and fiercely intense devotion. Kalen was trauma and loss wrapped in soft, golden fur. He refused the bottle, mourning his lost world. Eleanor slept on the floor beside his makeshift den, her hand a constant touch on his small, furry body, a physical anchor in a terrifying world. She became his whole world. The warmth, the faint scent of lavender and vanilla on her skin a surrogate for his mother's natural musk. It wasn't about taming him. It was about keeping a wild soul alive until he was strong enough to go home. Every little purr, every playful nip, cemented a bond that Eleanor felt was less stewardship and more destiny. She knew her time with Kalen was borrowed, a precious, fragile interlude before the inevitable farewell. "You have something special," remarked Dr. Kamal, the local vet who visited regularly. "I've seen many caretakers, but the way he responds to you, it's as if he knows you save his life." Eleanor merely smiled, rubbing the cub's small, round belly as he purred loudly enough to rattle the windows. "I didn't save him," she gently replied. "His mother did. I'm just keeping the promise I made to her." The months flew by like a whirlwind, and Kalen underwent a complete metamorphosis. He was no longer a fragile cub. By his first birthday, he was a powerful juvenile, over 90 kilograms of pure muscle and instinct. His paws were enormous. His roar had begun to resonate, and his playful pounces now left considerable bruises. Eleanor watched him with pride, mixed with a persistent, dull ache. He was magnificent, but his home was not her small compound. His destiny was the open plains. The hardest part of her promise had arrived, the release. Conservation officials arranged Kalen's transfer to a highly protected reintroduction area within the Masai Mara National Reserve. Here, he could learn from other wild lions and claim his heritage. The day before Kalen left was a silent agony. Eleanor sat under the African stars, Kalen's massive head resting in her lap, his weight a final, precious, comforting burden. She stroked his developing mane, whispering her fears and hopes, the language only the two of them shared. "You were born to run free," she murmured. "You will be a king. You will find your own family. And even if you forget me, my love, you must become who you were meant to be." The actual farewell was agonizing. As the team prepared to tranquilize Kalen for transport, Eleanor buried her face in his fur, inhaling his wild, musky scent one last time. Kalen watched her, his amber eyes deep and knowing until the final second before the sedative took effect. As the transport vehicle disappeared in a cloud of red dust, Eleanor sank to the ground, the vast silence of the Mara amplifying her pain. She had fulfilled her promise, but the cost was heavy. For the next 12 years, she worked tirelessly back home, but a part of her heart remained on the plains, guarding the memory of the cub she had raised to be wild. She never allowed herself to seek news of Kalen. It was better not to know, better to imagine him living his best life in freedom, without a single memory of bottles or lullabies. But sometimes at night, when the wind rustled through the trees, she thought she heard a distant roar, and her heart would clench with longing. It was the necessary sacrifice. True love meant letting go. 12 years passed in a blink, and also like a millennium. Eleanor, now a spry 70, received an unexpected invitation to attend a conservation symposium at the very reserve where Kaelin had been released. She reluctantly accepted, not for the speech or the recognition, but for a chance to simply breathe the air of the place Kaelin called home. On the second day, a guide named James took her on a game drive. He pointed toward a rocky outcrop. There, he explained, is our dominant male, the legendary Kaelin, the Golden King. Eleanor's hand shook as she raised the binoculars. Her heart nearly stopped. He was breathtaking, a pure, powerful mass of muscle, over 180 kilograms. His thick, reddish-gold mane was magnificent, his posture regal. Then, he turned his head, a slight tilt of recognition that she immediately knew. It was him, but Kaelin was not her endearing cub anymore. He was a deadly, ferocious, and utterly wild apex predator. Just then the wind shifted. Eleanor had worn the same simple lavender and vanilla perfume for decades. And in the next tense, silent seconds, the king froze. His massive head lifted, his nostrils flared, inhaling the impossible. A scent of comfort, of safety, of home, carried on the breeze. And then he started to run. He charged straight toward their vehicle, not with a sneaky stalk, but a powerful, ground-shaking gallop. Panic erupted among the tourists. James fumbled for his tranquilizer rifle, shouting, "Hold on!" But Eleanor, her eyes locked on the king, was completely calm. In a voice of sudden authority, she commanded, "Stop the vehicle." Now, James instinctively obeyed, slamming on the brakes. Kaelin skidded to a halt 5 meters from the Jeep. Tourists held their breath, terrified. But Eleanor looked past the teeth and claws. She saw the familiar amber eyes that had once gazed up at her from his makeshift den. "Kaelin," she whispered, her voice breaking with pure recognition. The response was immediate. Kaelin let out a sound that sent chills through the Jeep. It wasn't a roar, but a deep, vibrating purr, a sound of unbelievable recognition and inexpressible emotion. Ignoring the fearful whispers behind her, Eleanor slowly knelt on the African soil. Kaelin approached cautiously, each massive step deliberate. He paused, and then, with a delicacy that completely belied his terrifying strength, he extended one enormous forepaw and gently placed it on Eleanor's outstretched hand. The connection was instant, like an electric current. 12 years vanished in a heartbeat. Eleanor began to sob, uncontrollably. "It's me," she whispered. "I came back for you." And then, the real magic happened. Kaelin carefully lowered his massive, fearsome head and placed it fully in Eleanor's lap, exactly as he had done as a cub. The silence in the Jeep was sacred. No one dared to breathe. For endless moments, the Queen of Conservation and the King of the Mara shared an embrace that defied all logic, proving that memory, loyalty, and love could survive even the harshest wilderness. Eleanor stroked his thick mane, whispering those old lullabies one last time. "My sweet boy," she whispered, "you grew so big and strong and beautiful, just as I knew you would." Kaelin purred, the sound reverberating through his massive body, making the ground tremble slightly. But their moment was fragile. A distant roar signaled the pride, calling their king. Kaelin lifted his head, a visible struggle in his amber eyes, the pull of nature against the memory of the bond. Eleanor smiled through her tears and placed both hands on his enormous face. "Go," she gently urged. "Your family needs you. You are perfect. You are free." In one final, profound gesture of affection, Kaelin gently pressed his forehead to hers, a loving act he'd often done after a bottle as a baby. Then, he slowly backed away, his eyes never leaving her face until he was several meters distant. Then he let out a roar, powerful and echoing across the savannah, claiming his dominance, his territory, and his life. But before turning fully, he looked back one last time, and Eleanor swore she saw gratitude, recognition, and love in his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered as she watched him run toward the lionesses. "Thank you for remembering." Eleanor returned home with a profound peace. She had kept her promise, and in return, the wild had given her a final, incredible validation. The deepest connections are never truly broken. This story is a powerful reminder that connection is the antidote to chaos. It shows that when we choose love and commitment over convenience, we can create miracles. If Eleanor and Kalen's story of unwavering loyalty inspired you to find lasting connections in your own life, please like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that reconnect you with the gentle solutions of the heart. And let us know in the comments, what is the one promise you need to keep in your own life today? Let Eleanor and Kalen's impossible embrace be your inspiration. The early morning mist still hung heavy on the dense canopy of Virunga National Park. Ranger Elara Thompson, 10 years into her patrol, was accustomed to the sounds of dawn, the chorus of birds, the rustle of leaves, or the occasional distant roar. But this morning, the day began with an entirely different sound, one that broke all rules, a rapid, desperate pounding on the wooden stoop outside her outpost. This was no wind or wildlife. It was a fervent plea. Elara rushed to open the heavy wooden door, her hot coffee slipping from her grasp, and her heart stalled. Standing on the porch was a baby gorilla, small, trembling, and utterly terrified. But what stunned her was his snow-white coat. This was Snow, the rarest albino individual Virunga had ever known. His pale pink eyes were wide, glittering with pure panic. Without a snarl or a flight of fear, the little gorilla immediately grasped Elara's hand, a small, yet impossibly strong grip, and began pulling her forward. His entire tiny body shivered, but the intent was clear. He was dragging a human into the dangerous depths of the forest. Why? What could compel this fragile, isolated creature to place absolute faith in a stranger? This was where their story began, a tale of connection forged in crisis, where the courage of a tiny life transcended all the laws of the jungle. The next 2 minutes were a blend of pure instinct and utter surrender. Elara knew she was breaking every rule by following a primate, but the desperation etched on Snow's unique face was a language she couldn't ignore. She had to leave her radio, leave her cover, and focus only on that small handhold. Snow's pure white fur contrasted sharply with the emerald green of the Virunga jungle, creating a stark visual that reminded her of his fragility and the extraordinary risk he was taking. They crashed through thick undergrowth. Elara was not leading. She was being led. Snow's pace was urgent, relentless. He constantly looked back, his pale eyes pleading, ensuring she was steadfastly following. This small, vulnerable creature was utterly dependent on her mercy and strength. In that moment, Elara felt she was no longer a ranger, but an anchor for the baby's fear. The first major challenge was not physical, but an ultimate test of survival instinct. A low, territorial growl shook the ground. They had stumbled upon Keto, the family's dominant silverback and Snow's father, on patrol nearby. Keto was a massive block of muscle, the embodiment of authority and protective instinct. Elara instantly froze, her hand hovering over her sidearm. She should have stayed put or waited for backup. Keto's massive body pivoted, his black eyes locking onto the human intruder. The tension was thick, the air sucked dry. The moment just before the storm hits. But Snow shattered the standoff. He completely ignored his father, ignored the terrifying rumble that would send any other creature scattering, and simply pulled harder on Elara's trousers, urging her past Keto. In that tiny moment, Elara realized the profound meaning in Snow's actions. He wasn't just seeking help. He was establishing a bridge of trust between his father and his potential savior. He chose me over his king. Elara lowered her shoulder, avoiding direct eye contact as a sign of respect and submission, and put down her machete. She chose to trust Snow's guidance over the fear she had been taught for years. She realized this was not a rescue, but a partnership. Keto watched them, his initial fury replaced by a deep confusion and anxiety at his son's urgency. They continued on, the bond between the woman and the albino gorilla strengthening with every labored breath. The urgent trek finally ended by a cluster of jagged granite rocks, a geological scar left by a recent major storm. Snow stopped pulling abruptly. His gentle tugging turned into a painful sob, and he buried his face in the damp earth. Alara followed his gaze and witnessed the tragedy. Lumi, the mother gorilla, lay slumped beneath a horrific obstacle. A colossal ancient tree limb, the size of a truck tire, loosened by the heavy rain and crashed down, pinning her torso and arm against a boulder. Lumi was a magnificent creature, full of strength, but now utterly helpless. Her breathing was shallow and frantic, her eyes already glazed over with shock and pain, and that look was fading. They locked onto Alara's, and the look held no aggression, but a pure, silent plea. Alara immediately assessed the situation. The limb was too large, too heavy for one person to lift. It required a winch, a team, and hours, time Lumi did not have. Panic began to rise in Alara, but the unwavering presence of Snow beside her was a steady anchor. He climbed onto his mother's back, gently patting her head and whimpering, his whole body shaking with distress. Suddenly, a massive dark shadow fell over them. Keto had caught up, silently emerging through the dense foliage. His arrival carried no threat, but the most agonizing confirmation of the tragedy. He let out a low, mournful groan, a sound of supreme distress and impotence. He paced frantically, his massive hands reaching out but unable to gain purchase on the slippery wood that imprisoned his mate. In this tight space, two completely different beings, a human woman and a giant gorilla, were bound by a common fear, the loss of a mate and a parent. Alara made the ultimate, most reckless decision of her life as a ranger. She looked directly into Keto's wild, desperate eyes. She used a small, steady voice and gentle hand gestures, pointing at the large log, then to Keto's bulging, muscular arm, and then back to the log. She pushed on the log herself to show the futility of her own strength. She was communicating the truth. I am here to help, but I need your strength. We fight for her together. Keto watched, his primal rage subdued by the complexity of love and impending loss. The final barrier dissolved. They were now just two entities, a human and a primate, fighting for one family. The moment of truth hung heavy in the humid air. Alara quickly located a broken branch, a thick piece of wood, but far too small to leverage against the enormous weight. She wedged it into a crevice and threw her entire body weight onto it, grunting with effort. The massive log budged only a few millimeters, and the leverage branch cracked ominously. Failure was certain on her own. And then, the miracle, a massive, scar-black hand, the size of a dinner plate, slowly settled down and firmly gripped the other end of the lever. Keto had accepted the partnership. He positioned his body, wrapping his other arm around a stable root for leverage, channeling his unbelievable, primal strength toward the shared goal. Alara felt the ground shake beneath her feet as Keto's chest expanded. "All right, big guy," Alara whispered, her voice shaking with awe and terror. "My signal. Push. Push with me." They exerted their strength. Keto's sound was not a roar of anger, but a concentrated shriek of pure desperation and effort. The combined strength of human intellect and primate brawn was phenomenal. The wood groaned, the rocks ground beneath the earth, and with a sickening shriek, the massive log shifted, a precious 2 centimeters. Alara quickly adjusted the fulcrum. Snow, seeing the movement, scrambled to his mother's side, nudging her face as if urging her to hold on. Again, they pushed, breaths synchronized, hearts beating to the same frantic rhythm. The scent of human sweat and gorilla musk mingled in the air. The log shifted a few more crucial centimeters. Alara's muscles were screaming. Keto's shoulders looked like twin rock formations under the strain. The pressure was immense, but the thought of Lumi fading pushed them further. "One more time, Keto. Last one," Alara yelled, her voice raw. They coiled, one final, desperate surge of shared will. This time, the rock and the log parted with a great thud. With a final, weak groan, Lumi was free. She slumped onto the damp earth, immediately clutching her injured torso. Snow scrambled onto her back, chirping with boundless relief. Alara stumbled backward, completely spent, collapsing onto the forest floor. She stared, breathless, at the magnificent silverback still holding the life-saving lever, their hearts beating in tandem. The species barrier was gone. Only shared victory remained. The chaos of the rescue subsided, replaced by a profound silence. Alara and Keto were side by side, both exhausted, both survivors. Keto looked down at his mate, who was slowly recovering, and then slowly turned his head and looked directly at Alara. His deep black eyes held hers for a long, steady moment. There was no aggression, no dominance display, only an unmistakable expression of profound acknowledgement and gratitude. Then, Keto performed the unthinkable. He slowly extended one of his massive, scarred fingers, the size of a dinner roll, and gently touched Alara's arm. It was the softest touch possible, a nonverbal, undeniable thank you that resonated louder than any human words. Alara did not flinch. She accepted this deepest form of respect. She was no longer an outsider. She had been welcomed into a sacred family moment. Lumi, the mother, slowly sat up, weak but alive. She saw Snow, her unique albino child, clinging to her. She pulled him close, wrapping a massive arm around him. The sight was intensely emotionally satisfying. A family reunited, saved by a partnership built on trust that transcended both species and color. Alara realized the profound solution this moment offered. Conservation is built not on control, but on connection. This incredible story, born from the fierce love of a family in Virunga, shows us that the differences we see, white fur versus human skin, ape versus human, are meaningless in the face of a common purpose. Snow, the albino gorilla, might be seen as an outcast by some, but to his parents, he was everything. He had the courage to trust a stranger. Keto, the mighty silverback, chose collaboration over confrontation, choosing faith in a compassionate hand over the rage in his heart. This was more than a rescue. It was proof that connection is the common language of survival. If a mother's love can teach a baby gorilla to trust a human, what barriers can we break down? If this story gave you faith in connection, hit the like button on this video. And if you believe in the vital work of rangers like Alara, who risk everything every day for these families in Virunga, please subscribe to support the Virunga National Park Fund. Every subscription is a sign of trust that helps protect this fragile, beautiful world. What moment in your own life made you realize that the strongest connections are often the most unexpected? Share your story in the comments below. The dawn was still gentle, casting pale, golden streaks upon the water of the Luangwa River in Zambia. But for the Mwizi pride of lions, that serenity was just a thin veil covering the lurking dangers. This was a large, powerful pride, consisting of 8 adult lions, but the future of the entire pride lay solely in the life of one fragile cub, a little lion named Keto. This morning, their mission was to overcome a seemingly simple but challenging task, climbing the high, slippery bank of the river. For Layla, the experienced mother lion, it was merely an exercise in strength and agility. But for tiny Keto, every step was a battle. As the pride exerted themselves to climb the bank, tragedy struck. Keto, with his weak legs and lack of skill, slipped on the cracked, damp clay. The cub slid down, unable to stop, and finally became trapped on a small, precarious ledge right next to the deep, black water. The stillness of the morning shattered. Layla whipped around, a raw, burning roar of anxiety tearing through the air. It contrasted sharply with Keto's high-pitched, frightened wails, a sound of desperation echoing beneath the steep cliff face. The Mwizi pride's only hope for survival was being held by a tiny piece of clay in a mother's extreme distress. Trapped on the narrow ledge, Keto clawed desperately. The cold, wet clay slid from his tiny claws, and every attempt to climb only exhausted the cub further and pushed him closer to the abyss. Keto no longer wailed. He whimpered, gasping for breath, his whole body trembling as he realized he was utterly alone, facing danger. Between the sheer bank and the dark water, Keto understood he was separated from the safety of his mother and the pride. On the high bank, Layla was frantic in her helplessness. She paced back and forth along the cliff's edge, her growls fierce, agonizing, as if ripping her guts out. She lowered her head as far as she could, trying to reach out, but the height and the slipperiness of the bank prevented her from reaching her cub. Though she was one of Africa's most formidable predators, facing this boundary between life and death, Layla was just a desperate mother. She knew that a reckless jump would only result in her being trapped, or worse, becoming a victim, ending the Mwizi pride's only hope. The other pride members also gathered, forming a silent circle of anxiety. Their eyes were fixed on Keto, sharing the same primal fear as Layla. Their collective strength was completely useless against gravity and erosion. And then, the real threat emerged from beneath the water surface. At first, it was just a faint ripple, a subtle shift that only seasoned predators like Layla could detect. Then, it appeared, a flattened head, ancient, scaly skin, slowly rising from the water. It was the old hunter, a colossal, expert Nile crocodile. Its cold, yellow eyes did not blink, locked on Keto, the easy, inescapable prey, trapped right at the water's edge. The old hunter moved slowly, almost silently. It did not need to hurry. Time was on its side. Layla let out a terrifying warning shriek, a sound filled with both fury and plea, but the crocodile responded only with deadly silence. The distance between Keto and the jaws shortened rapidly. The unequal battle for survival had begun, and all the lions could do was stand on the bank, watching their only cub face death from the depths below. The old hunter was close, just a few strokes away from Keto. Under the increasingly intense sunlight, its scales glistened like steel, creating a gruesome image on the quiet water. Keto was now completely paralyzed with fear. His cries faded, replaced by suffocating wheezes. The cub tried to retreat, pressing himself against the clay bank, but the sheer slope itself became a wall of hopelessness, offering him no foothold. The crocodile's patience was over. It dipped its body slightly beneath the water, gathering momentum. This was a calculated, deadly performance. On the bank, Layla roared so furiously that her throat felt like it would bleed. She paced frantically along every meter of the cliff edge, searching for even a single point of attachment. She tried reaching out one more time, attempting to touch her cub, but the distance was still too great and too dangerous. Layla knew well the crocodile's powerful bite and terrifying speed underwater. An ill-considered jump would only lead to disaster. She had fought elephants, confronted hyenas, but never had she felt so helpless. Her strength, the ultimate weapon of a predator, was completely useless against the separation of the terrain and the stealth of another hunter. She could only watch her only cub sliding into the circle of death. Layla's helplessness turned into a desperate roar, a sound signaling the most painful surrender. After a terrifying moment of silence, the old hunter suddenly accelerated. Water splashed. It opened its massive jaws, the sharp teeth waiting to clamp down. The crocodile lunged, its huge body rising out of the water. Everything happened in a flash, too fast to react. Keto shut his eyes tight. The moment of fate had arrived. Layla, with eyes burning with despair, could only reach out her claws in the air in vain. This horrific scene would haunt her for the rest of her life. The impending sound of impact, the mother's powerlessness, and the imminent death. It seemed no miracle could intervene in the harsh laws of nature. Keto's fate was sealed. Just as the crocodile's jaws were about to close, a seismic event occurred. The water, which had been churning from the crocodile's attack, suddenly surged even more violently, as if a volcano had erupted beneath it. It wasn't the crocodile, but a huge, dark block of muscle that abruptly surfaced. Pinda, a massive male hippopotamus, suddenly appeared, letting out an earth-shattering roar of fury. The crocodile had made a fatal mistake. It was hunting too close to Pinda's territory. This was not an act of rescue, but a furious and brutal defense of territory. Pinda charged straight at the crocodile. Hippos are one of Africa's most aggressive species, and its rage was uncontainable. The two giants of the river plunged into a fierce melee. The Luangwa River turned into a white, swirling pool, with mud and water splashing into the air. The crocodile, though powerful, was bewildered and turned to defend itself against a larger and more aggressive enemy. This chaos created a small, but crucially significant miracle for Keto. The brutal clash between Pinda and the crocodile created a powerful wave that washed against the bank. This wave, an unintentional act, pushed the cub slightly closer to the bank, just a hand's breadth, but it was enough. On the bank, Layla, who had been frozen in despair, realized this was the only chance. Her long-suppressed maternal instinct exploded. She was no longer a hunting lion. She was a lifeline. Layla crouched low, stretching her body to the maximum, all her strength concentrated in her hind legs gripping the slippery earth. She lowered her head and gently clamped onto Keto's scruff. Layla could not afford to err. A pull too strong would injure the cub, while too light would lose him. With a mother's astonishing precision, she applied a gentle but firm grip on Keto's soft flesh. And then, with a strained roar, not of anger, but of sheer effort, Layla used her entire body to haul Keto up. The cub surfaced from the water, from the chaos, and from the jaws of death. Layla pulled Keto up the high cliff, placing him safely on the dry bank, where the other Pride members were waiting in breathless relief. Life had won. On the high bank, Keto lay curled up, exhausted but safe. The cub's entire body was soaked, trembling not from cold, but from the release of extreme fear. Layla immediately switched from fight mode to caregiving. She lay down, lovingly licking Keto with her rough tongue, washing the mud and terror from his small coat. Every lick was an affirmation of life, a promise that the nightmare was over. In her immense relief, Layla let out deep, soft purrs, the sound of safety and intense maternal love. Keto nudged his head into his mother's neck, seeking the warmth and peace that had been stolen in that moment. The Mwizi pride was now completely relaxed, their anxiety dissolving, replaced by quiet contentment. They looked down at the Luangwa River below. The melee had ended. The old hunter had retreated, and Pinda was still busy stirring the water, letting out one final warning bellow. Layla looked down at the hippo, her cub's unwilling rescuer. There was no language for communication, no ritual to express gratitude. But in the mother lion's long, steady gaze, there was a profound understanding. Keto had been saved not by the intervention of his own kind, but by the random intersection of natural laws. It was a silent, primal gratitude for the one who had unintentionally protected their most precious life. The sun was high, casting warmth upon the returned serenity. It was time to go. Layla gently nudged Keto, reminding the cub that the journey continued. With the pride, she turned her back on the river, carrying Keto, their sole hope, in a strange tale of unwelcome protection from a grumpy hippo. This terrifying adventure was a reminder that in the harshness of nature, life can still hold on thanks to the most unexpected elements. Keto's life, the pride's only life, was saved by pure territorial fury. The journey continues, and Keto will grow up, carrying the story of the perilous dawn on the Luangwa River, and the lesson that sometimes the greatest savior comes from where we least expect it. Wilderness is a constant chain of challenges, courage, and unexpected wonders. If the story of Keto's dramatic survival and Layla's boundless love has touched your heart, Don't miss our upcoming journeys. Click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications to join us in discovering the emotional moments, the marvelous connections, and the subtle solutions that the natural world provides. Your support is the strength that allows us to continue telling these amazing stories. The African sky in the golden hour always possesses a breathtaking stillness. The sunrise had just broken, painting the emerald grasslands of the savanna a vibrant gold, creating a magnificent yet fragile scene. Amidst this tranquility stood the ranger station, where David and his faithful German shepherd, Rex, began a new workday. David's job was more than just patrolling. It was a silent, relentless war to protect this land from poachers and the ever-present natural dangers. That morning, as David was brewing coffee, the silence was abruptly shattered by a rustling sound. From the bushes near the station, a small, desperate figure stumbled out. It was a lion cub. It neither fled nor roared as its wild instinct dictated, but instead appeared visibly weak and terrified, clumps of mud clinging to its soft, downy coat. The moment the cub's large, innocent eyes met David's, everything became clear. It rushed toward the ranger, then abruptly stood on its hind legs, its tiny forepaws outstretched in an unmistakable gesture. It was not a demand for food or a playful motion. It was a desperate, unspoken plea. David's heart tightened. He knew instantly. This small lion had lost its mother, and she was surely in terrible danger. In that primal, wordless connection, David no longer saw a wild animal, but the image of a child begging for its mother's life. Just looking into the earnest eyes of Leo, the name David quickly gave the cub. The ranger understood he had no time for doubt. He had to answer this undeniable request, rushing into a race against time to save a family. David quickly grabbed his backpack containing basic rescue gear and signaled for Rex to follow. The journey tracking the lion cub, Leo, was an act of absolute trust in survival instinct. Leo didn't hesitate. It turned and dashed into the thick undergrowth. It moved with astonishing clarity of purpose, pausing only for a few seconds to ensure the ranger and Rex were keeping up. They moved away from the open savanna, pressing deep into a dense, thinly shaded scrubland, terrain often exploited by poachers to hide and conceal their cruel tracks. The sun was already high. The cool morning quickly turned into a scorching heat. David felt a growing anxiety. The heat would drain the strength of the injured mother lion and the young Leo. As they moved, David scrutinized the ground. He saw deeply disturbed soil, long sliding lion tracks on the dry earth, and tufts of dark golden fur caught on low branches. Every sign painted a picture of struggle and terror. This was not merely a natural accident. It was a terrifying consequence of human cruelty and irresponsibility. David was not looking for lurking criminals. He was searching for the deadly hazards they had left behind. He had to proceed slowly, observing meticulously to avoid any other remaining traps. A sense of dread gripped his heart. This area was darker, damper, a stark contrast to the magnificent beauty outside. Finally, their desperate journey concluded. Lying motionless, half hidden beneath a large acacia bush, was Kala, Leo's mother. The sight nearly stole David's breath. Kala was not caught in a freshly set snare. Instead, she was horribly entangled in a chaotic mess of old ropes and ripped net fragments, the discarded residue of a failed poaching attempt. These old ropes, though weathered by rain and sun, were still sharp and tenacious, silent blades slowly strangling the life out of her. Kala had tried to escape, but her struggles only tightened the old ropes and netting around her leg and neck. She lay there, immobile from pain and exhaustion, her golden eyes dulled with despair. Leo immediately rushed to his mother, rubbing his head against her flank, uttering worried whimpers. David instantly recognized the severity of the situation. This was an emergency requiring absolute precision. He could see deep wounds caused by the ropes. If Kala panicked, she could sever a major blood vessel or inadvertently endanger her rescuer. The relentless sun beat down, intensifying the pressure of time. He quickly pulled out his satellite phone, his voice firm yet calm as he called the emergency veterinary team. David knew they needed to arrive immediately, but he couldn't wait. He had to act at once, for Kala's life was staked on his courage and meticulous care. Time seemed to stand still under the scorching midday sun. David knew he had only minutes to execute everything perfectly. He gently motioned Rex to lie down at a safe distance,
Rex.
signaling the dog to vigilantly watch their surroundings, wary of any other predators drawn by the scent of blood. David approached Kala, his steps slow and deliberate. He spoke to her in a low, steady tone, as if reassuring an old friend. "It's going to be all right, Kala. I'm here to help you. Try to stay calm." He prepared a tranquilizer dart. This was the critical step. The dosage had to be perfect. Too little, and she would struggle and injure herself further. Too much, and she might never wake up. David administered the injection quickly and accurately into her muscle. He waited patiently until Kala's breathing deepened, her eyes glazed over, and her body finally relaxed in exhaustion. With Kala still, the most difficult and dangerous work began. David knelt beside the queen of the savannah, his life mere inches from powerful claws and jaws. He used sharp surgical scissors and a specialized cutting tool, beginning to tackle the entanglement of old ropes and torn nets wrapped around Kala. These strands had deeply embedded themselves in her flesh, causing severe lacerations, many of which were already infected. He had to work meticulously, with intense focus, sweat streaming down his face from the heat and stress. Every cut was tactical, especially the ropes around her neck. A slight slip could sever a blood vessel or asphyxiate her upon waking. David cut each strand one by one, freeing her skin from the constricting grip of the poaching remnants. It was a persistent battle against the senseless cruelty of abandoned traps. From a distance, Rex lay still, his sharp eyes scanning the area. Leo, the cub, rested his head on his forepaws, his eyes fixed on his mother, as if his life force was being directly channeled to Kala. They were silent witnesses, symbols of hope and resilience in the face of tragedy. After what felt like an eternity, the final rope was cut free from Kala's leg. David let out a sigh of relief, feeling a profound sense of release. Just then, the familiar sound of the veterinary team's truck engine echoed in the distance. David quickly re-examined the wounds, provided initial first aid, and together with the vet team, gently moved Kala onto a stretcher. Rex and Leo followed closely, never leaving their mother's side. The rescue had succeeded, but the journey to healing lay ahead, long and full of challenges. The smell of antibiotics and medical alcohol replaced the scent of earth and blood. The initial frenzy was replaced by the focused quiet of the veterinary treatment room. While the professional medical team began treating the deep wounds and administering fluids to Kala, David remained as a supervisor, monitoring her heart rate and breathing. He witnessed the incredible endurance within the lioness's body. Despite her exhaustion, her will to survive was fierce. Leo, the cub, maintained his absolute devotion. He never left sight of the isolation area where his mother was being treated. He paced back and forth, then rested his head on his paws, always facing her. David often brought fresh water and carefully prepared portions of meat to Leo, speaking to him with gentle, reassuring words. It was in these quiet moments that the bond between human and animal was strengthened. Leo occasionally rubbed his head against the separating fence, seeking comfort and responding with absolute trust. Rex, the shepherd, also showed special empathy, not seeing Leo as a dangerous wild creature, but as a small being in need of protection. Long days passed. Kala's fever subsided. She began to stand, her initial steps stiff but gradually gaining strength. The moment Kala was fully conscious, she saw Leo and let out a deep, warm purr that resonated throughout the clinic. It was the sound of a mother confirming her child was safe and the deepest, most primal expression of gratitude toward David. David often sat outside her recovery enclosure, not as a guard, but as a protector, He realized that this was the truest form of conservation, not just protecting the land, but healing each individual and earning the respect and trust of the wild creatures they swore to protect. Kala recovered rapidly, her innate strength fueled by the knowledge that Leo was safe. The wounds were healing, now reduced to faint scars. The time for the mother and son to return home was drawing near. The day of freedom arrived. David chose the late afternoon, when the sun was dipping towards the west, creating a glorious yet cool backdrop, easing Kala's stress during the transition. Kala and Leo were completely healthy. Only the faint scars on Kala's body served as a testament to the ordeal. They drove the pair to an isolated corner of the preserve, rich with water and food, ensuring no sign of poaching traps remained. The door of the transport crate opened. Kala stepped out with majesty, taking a deep breath of the wild air. She stood there for a moment, her eyes sweeping over the land she had fought to return to. Leo ran out, immediately nudging his mother's flank, demonstrating the pure happiness of a child reunited with its mother. David stepped back, giving the family their space. He felt as if he was witnessing a small miracle of life. Before disappearing into the tall grasses, Kala suddenly paused. She turned her head, looking directly at David. It was not a look of aggression or indifference, but a deep, prolonged gaze, a look David knew he would never forget. It was a silent thank you, an acknowledgement from the depths of her instinct. Then, with a decisive flick of her tail, she led Leo running into the savannah, where the sun was setting, a family healed and reborn. David stood watching until the figures of the mother and son completely vanished. His heart was filled with stillness and contentment. This was the reality of conservation work, small acts of heroism performed in solitude. He reflected, this story is powerful evidence of the deep, fundamental link between us and the wild world. Leo did not ask David for food or protection. He asked for compassion. And because David answered, a family survived, and the fragile balance of the ecosystem was mended. We all have a role in protecting these magnificent creatures. You may not be directly on the front line like David, but your support for anti-poaching and wildlife rescue organizations creates stories like Kala's and Leo's. We can replace despair with connection and fear with trust. Do not let cruelty be humanity's final mark on nature. Please like this video to spread the message of hope and subscribe to the channel for more stories of silent courage. The wild world needs us, and in return, it shows us the deepest meaning of compassion. In the heart of one of America's most beloved wildlife sanctuaries, the legendary San Diego Zoo, there are always stories waiting to be told. But this is not a story of ordinary life. This is the tale of a brilliant golden day, a majestic lion, and a woman named Clara Evans. It was a tranquil Tuesday afternoon in the autumn of 2025. The San Diego sky was clear, and the warm sun highlighted the familiar, joyful sounds of the zoo. Something unprecedented occurred. Leo, a dignified 12-year-old male lion and a model resident of the African Cliffs exhibit, unexpectedly found a gap in his enclosure. Alarms blared. Visitors panicked and scattered. Every security protocol was breached. Every instinct told witnesses to flee from the self-liberated king of the jungle. But Leo was not looking for prey. He was looking for safety. And that sanctuary, incredibly, was standing right at the main gate, staring back at him with calm eyes. Her name was Clara. Leo charged without hesitation, ignoring the surrounding chaos. What happened next defied biology, defied time, and defied everything we thought we knew about the wild heart. Their moment of reunion would not just be a zoo incident. It was a miracle orchestrated by destiny between a lion at the peak of his power and the woman entering the final chapter of her life. To understand why a mature, powerful lion would choose to run towards a woman instead of escaping into freedom, we must travel back in time to 2013, about 12 years earlier. At that time, Clara Evans was a retired veterinary technician, a woman known for her infinite patience and her ability to soothe damaged creatures. Even in retirement, Clara maintained a close relationship with the San Diego Zoo. When Leo was a weak, orphan cub, just a few days old, the veterinary team knew he needed more than just standard medical care. They needed love. They needed Clara. For those crucial 10 months, Clara's home became Leo's first sanctuary. This was not just an animal care assignment. It was a deep, nurturing relationship. Clara spent hours bottle-feeding Leo milk, with feedings that stretched late into the night. She sang him simple lullabies, and Leo would respond with a purr, so loud, she joked it idled louder than a tractor. Clara didn't teach Leo to hunt or fight. She taught him about security and trust. She gently soothed his teething pains and guided his first wobbly steps on the lawn. She believed that love could heal the wound of loss. But the safe time didn't last. After 10 months, Leo was big and strong enough to begin life as a lion. The zoo needed to transfer him to a new enclosure where he could learn to interact with his own kind. It was a necessary decision for Leo's safety and development, but a painful cut for Clara. On the day of separation, she didn't cry loudly, just quietly placed her old gardening glove, soaked with her familiar scent, near the door of Leo's new enclosure. "You need to forget me, Leo," she whispered through the wire mesh, knowing that wild animals must forget excessive human attachment to survive. For the next decade, Leo grew into a magnificent male lion, dominating his territory. Clara kept her distance, visiting only occasionally and standing far away, respecting the fragile boundary between the wild world she had helped him return to and the human world. Leo was a lion, a creature of nature. The zoo staff was certain that Leo had forgotten those initial months. But had he really? Could a bond formed in loss be erased by time and barbed wire? That very question led to the dramatic moment at the zoo gates in 2025. Back to the fateful sunny afternoon in 2025. The alarm bells still echoed across the San Diego Zoo grounds. But for Clara Evans, every other sound seemed to vanish. She had heard the news and rushed to the main gate. Standing there, amidst the chaos, Clara was the only person who didn't run. She knew Leo better than anyone. And in that moment, she felt an inexplicable urge. Leo was not escaping. He was searching. When Leo burst out of the Africa Rocks area, he showed no signs of aggression or wildness. His gaze was strangely focused. Despite being a powerful and experienced 12-year-old lion, Leo ignored the screaming visitors, the approaching security vehicles. He ran straight toward the entrance gate where Clara stood, like a biological compass guided by a single signal. Leo stopped abruptly just a few meters from Clara. His massive body was tense, not in preparation for an attack, but from an intense struggle of emotion. Clara slowly reached out her hand, without fear, and whispered his name. "Leo, Leo, my little boy." The recognition came not through sight. Over a decade, Leo had seen hundreds of faces, but this voice, that gentle tone, cut through all barriers of time and instinct. Simultaneously, his nose twitched, breathing in the familiar sense of dirt, grass, and most importantly, the faint fragrance of the inexpensive perfume Clara had worn since 2013. What followed was the moment that all witnesses, including the breath-held security team, could not believe their eyes. Leo, the heavy sovereign, slowly lowered his head to the ground. He let out a small chuff, a soft, almost kitten-like sound that lions use only to greet close kin. Then, he gently rubbed his thick-maned neck against Clara's trembling but steady hand. Clara did not hesitate. She stepped forward and embraced Leo's thick neck. Amidst the blaring alarms, the silence of that moment was absolute. Leo was not a threat. He was an orphan who had found his mother after 12 years. Both proved that the memory of love is never truly lost, only dormant. The bond Clara had woven with tenderness when Leo was just a cub had suddenly awakened, breaking the wall between two worlds, bringing absolute peace to both human and lion on a day of total chaos at the zoo. The tension subsided. The San Diego Zoo security and veterinary team stood there, witnessing a miracle. They understood that attempting to forcibly capture or sedate Leo at that moment was not the right action. The lion's behavior spoke volumes. This was not a threat, but an event of unconditional love. They decided to let Clara and Leo's story guide their actions. However, amidst the joy of the reunion, the story soon became tinged with tragedy. Clara Evans had come to the zoo not just for her love for Leo, but for a harsher truth. She had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Her life, like a fading sunset, was entering its final, fragile, and precious seasons. Leo's escape and search for her were not a coincidence. It was a miraculous intervention of fate, an event that happened at the very moment both needed each other most. The zoo made an unprecedented humanitarian decision. They established a special, closely monitored access area at the veterinary center. Here, Clara was allowed to visit Leo every day. They couldn't share the same enclosure, but the thin wire mesh barrier was now merely a formality. The subsequent images became living proof of this sacred bond. We see Clara sitting on a stool, reading a book or simply in silence, while Leo, the robust 12-year-old lion, rested, gently resting his head near the barrier. Clara stroked his thick mane through the mesh, whispering old fairy tales and words of encouragement. Leo, despite being a formidable predator, found absolute solace and peace in the voice that had taught him his first lessons about life. These daily visits became a testament to enduring love, unmarred by time, age, or species boundaries. They showed that sometimes the greatest connection is not about freedom or instinct, but about the quality of the original relationship. Leo helped Clara find serenity and courage in her final months, and Clara brought Leo, the solitary lion, the feeling of unconditional love he had lost for so long. Love truly is the greatest healer. Spring arrived, bringing an end to this moving story. After weeks of sharing precious moments at the veterinary center, the final day of separation arrived. On a quiet March morning, Clara Evans passed away peacefully in the presence of the lion cub she had saved years ago. The image of Clara, holding Leo's massive paw through the bars, was one of absolute peace. Clara's passing left an unfillable void in Leo's heart. The mighty lion became withdrawn, spending most of his time lying near where Clara used to sit, seemingly waiting for a familiar voice to speak. Though still meticulously cared for, Leo's spirit gradually withered. A few months later, on a silent morning, Leo passed away in his sleep. The 13-year-old lion, at the peak of his strength, likely did not die of illness, but of an invisible pain, a heart that could not endure a second loss. Their story concluded together, almost in the same heartbeat. In the face of the touching story that had captured millions of hearts worldwide, the San Diego Zoo decided to do something unprecedented in remembrance. They not only named a special animal care program after Clara, but also commissioned a bronze statue placed prominently at the entrance to the Africa Rocks area. The statue depicts the moment Leo gently rubbed his head against Clara's hand, an eternal symbol of love without boundaries. The story of Leo and Clara Evans transcends a typical wildlife event. It is a profound lesson to each of us about the meaning of love and the difference between instinct and memory. Leo, at age 12, still carried the strength and survival instincts of the king of the jungle. But when faced with the opportunity to escape, he was guided by something stronger than instinct, the memory of tenderness. That memory turned a moment of danger into a confession of love. We often think that wild animals act only on instinct, but Leo proved that a relationship built with patience and compassion can create an eternal imprint on the heart, regardless of species. Their story reminds us to always sow the seeds of love, for we never know when those seeds will blossom into a miracle, bringing healing and meaning to the final chapters of life. They found each other, guided not by wild instinct, but by the memory of love. What memory is guiding your life? Look around you. Who in your life is waiting for a simple touch, a moment of recognition? Take that leap of faith. If this story has touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that love never forgets. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that restore faith in the power of connection. In the heart of the vast African savanna, where the sun scorches all day, life is a silent and relentless struggle. But for a tiny creature like Keto, a zebra foal only a few weeks old, that fragile peace was quickly shattered. Its black and white stripes, meant to be protective camouflage, now looked desperately vulnerable against the arid grassland. The jarring, cackling laughter of a hyena pack cut through the silence. 3 spotted hyenas, eyes glazed with hunger, had surrounded Keto. The foal panicked, its tiny legs trembling as if about to collapse, letting out continuous, desperate, high-pitched cries for help. It was the most heartbreaking sound in nature, a plea that no mother could answer in time. And then, the familiar engine sound of an old, dust-covered Jeep appeared from the distance. It was Elias, the seasoned park ranger. He was on patrol, but the sight through his binoculars instantly turned a routine workday into an urgent mission. We are called the guardians of the wild, but on some days, we are simply the last hope, a lifeline racing against death, Elias thought. Without a moment of hesitation, Elias floored the accelerator, driving straight into the thicket, creating the loudest noise possible. The hyenas flinched but did not give up. Elias quickly stepped out, holding a flare gun. He aimed at the ground and fired a non-lethal warning shot. The sharp bang echoed across the savanna. The hyenas paused, their sharp eyes still fixed on the foal, but they began to retreat. The intervention was successful. For now, Keto was safe. But now, Elias faced the biggest question: how to get this little stripe back to its family. After the flare's explosion, silence returned to the savanna, but it was a heavy, tense silence. Elias stood motionless beside the Jeep, his eyes fixed on where the hyenas had vanished. They hadn't fled, they had only withdrawn. He knew the predators were still lurking somewhere, patiently waiting for him to leave. Elias's gaze shifted to Keto. The zebra foal stood frozen, its body shaking in waves, its large, round eyes filled with primal fear. The bite mark on its tail, though shallow, was painful proof of what it had just endured. Elias holstered his gun, knelt, and began speaking in a low, soothing voice. "It's all right, little friend. It's over." It was the most magical moment in Elias's job. Keto, who should have been terrified and fleeing from a human, hesitated and then slowly moved closer. It investigated, paused, and then with a decisive movement, gently rubbed its wet nose against Elias's knee. This was not the typical behavior of a wild animal. It was the absolute surrender of a creature in desperate need of protection. Elias felt that fragile trust transmit through his skin. He gently placed his hand on Keto's back, stroking the striped coat, feeling the foal's frantic heartbeat. This connection was a wordless whisper, an invisible bond woven from fear and compassion. "You are completely alone," Elias murmured. He knew the law of the wild. A zebra mother rarely abandons her foal, but Keto had been lost for too long, and something must have gone wrong with its family. To leave it here was a death sentence. His mission had now changed. It was no longer just a rescue from immediate danger, but a quest to bring Keto home. Elias quickly checked the wound on Keto's tail. Luckily, it was just a shallow tear. He grabbed his radio, informing the base of his change of plans. "This is Elias. I found a lost zebra foal and have established a bond with it. I will not return until I find its herd. I am following the old tracks." It was a personal commitment, a promise to the tiny life clinging to his leg. From that moment, they were no longer a ranger and prey, but a reluctant team on a journey to find hope. The journey began. Elias moved slowly, his eyes searching for the subtle signs on the ground. Crushed blades of grass, broken leaves, all making up the language of the savanna. Keto stayed close beside him, its small legs straining to keep up with Elias's long strides, but never falling behind. The foal clearly felt safe and protected by Elias's tall form. They had been walking for almost an hour. The sun was high, promising a sweltering afternoon. Elias began to recognize the distinct tracks of a large zebra herd. Hope surged within him, but then another, colder sign appeared: fresh buffalo dung and hardened, dry mud tracks. Evidence of a massive Cape buffalo herd passing through. The zebra tracks were leading them straight into the territory of the notoriously aggressive Cape buffalo. This area was known as Forbidden Territory due to their unpredictable ferocity, as they are among the most dangerous species in Africa. Elias stopped, looking ahead, where dense bushes obscured the view. He gently placed his hand on Keto's back again, feeling the anxiety spreading through the air. Keto's path home would not be easy, and the real test was just beginning. The zebra tracks led Elias and Keto to a dry riverbed, which was currently occupied by a large herd of Cape buffalo. With their massive horns and volatile temperament, these buffalo are one of the most dangerous animals on the savanna. Elias could see the huge lead bulls, with their immense bodies, staring at them from distance. Their eyes were alert and ready to turn aggressive if they felt threatened. "We are standing in the territory of the Black Death," Elias told himself. The law here was simple. Any sign of fear or sudden movement would be met with overwhelming force. Keto sensed the danger. The foal became tense, instinctively wanting to run, but was restrained by Elias's presence. Elias gently rubbed Keto's nape, then switched to using a soft rope loosely tied around its neck, not for coercion, but to create a physical and mental anchor. He whispered reassurances, but his eyes never left the buffalo herd. Elias's strategy was to move slowly, deliberately, skirting the edge of the territory, maintaining a non-threatening posture. His movement had a blend with the natural rhythm of the place: slow, steady, and silent. This was a difficult challenge. However, all of Keto's focus was on the buffalo, and the foal constantly backed up, stepping on Elias's heels. The scene focused on the contrast between Elias's calm, sweating face and Keto's wide, fearful eyes. Suddenly, the largest bull raised its head, let out a powerful snort, and stomped the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. It was a mock charge, a display of power to test its opponents. Keto panicked, trying to bolt, but the soft rope around its neck held it safely beside Elias. Elias did not flinch. He stood steady like a tree, without blinking, and without any counter-aggressive movement. He maintained his control, not through force, but through sheer willpower and respect for the herd. He knew that if he showed fear, the buffalo would sense it and charge for real. The tense moment lasted an eternity, broken only by the sound of the wind and Keto's heavy breathing. Finally, after a terrifying second, the bull extinguished its rage, lowered its head, and continued grazing. The danger had passed. They continued moving, and once they were out of the buffalo's sight, relief washed over them. Elias untied the rope, and Keto rubbed its head against him, saying thank you in its own way. "We passed the test. For you, it was a lesson in silent obedience. For me, it's a reminder that true courage is not in fighting, but in calm, gentle control," Elias mused. They continued their journey, Keto's steps now more confident. The tracks of the large zebra herd returned, and this time, they were clear, distinct from any other dangerous animal's tracks. From the crest of a sandy hill, Elias finally saw it. A massive zebra herd, hundreds of stripes merging under the afternoon sun. Keto let out a joyful whinny and ran towards its kind. Elias smiled, relieved, thinking the journey was over. But just as Keto charged in, Elias suddenly realized something was wrong. Despite the proximity of the zebra herd, he felt a chilling sensation creeping in, a strange silence in the reaction of the entire herd. This sign kept him on high alert. Keto bolted into the large zebra herd, as if returning home after a nightmare. It was a picture full of hope, a child returning to the family's embrace. However, the welcome Keto received was surprisingly cold. As the foal tried to squeeze in among the moving stripes, several large maras turned their backs. A stallion let out a warning snarl, and others stomped their feet, rejecting Keto's presence. Elias felt his heart sink. He knew the wild had cruel laws. Zebras identify each other not just by stripes, but also by scent and the rhythm of the herd's movement. Keto, lost for too long and carrying the scent of dust and solitary fear, had become a stranger. The foal stopped, lowered its head, utterly confused and distressed by the rejection from its own kind. Elias quickly ran over, pulling Keto towards him before the foal's panic could spread and cause the entire herd to attack. He hugged Keto's trembling neck. "Not your family, little friend," Elias soothed, disappointment rising in his heart. After everything they had been through, he thought it was over. During that brief moment of rest, Elias began re-examining the tracks. The main trail was large, clearly leading to the zebra herd he had just encountered. But something wasn't right. An animal would not abandon its young unless it had met with disaster. He investigated more closely. Not far away, he spotted a secondary track. Fainter, slower, almost imperceptible, indicating the heavy steps of an animal walking alone. "Here it is," Elias whispered. "This track speaks of exhaustion and pain, of a mother who could not keep up with the herd's pace of survival." They began to follow that solitary path. The land became increasingly arid, with less shade. Keto's confusion transformed into focus. Its ears perked up, its small nose constantly sniffing the air. It recognized a familiar scent, an unmistakable smell of its own mother. Keto began to run, not fleeing, but running with a clear purpose. The final track led them to a cluster of large acacia trees, offering sparse shade. Under one of the trees, they found Zora, the zebra mother. She lay motionless on the ground, her striped coat faded by dust, her massive body looking unusually frail. Keto rushed to her with a tragic cry, nudging her face, trying to push Zara to stand up. But the mare only opened her eyes weakly, powerless. Elias knelt beside Zara. He checked her quickly. No blood, no wounds from fighting or accident. The problem was internal. Her breathing was heavy, her skin dry, and her reaction slow when gently pinched. She was severely dehydrated and completely exhausted from struggling under the intense heat, causing her to fall behind the herd in the search for water. This was a physiological problem, less gruesome, but equally dangerous. Zara was slowly dying from the harshness of the savannah. Elias tightly gripped his radio, his voice urgent but controlled. "This is Elias. I have found an adult zebra mare, suffering from severe exhaustion and dehydration. I need an emergency veterinary team at this coordinate. We need 4 fluids and supportive care immediately." He looked down, seeing Keto lying close to its mother, the small body of silent comfort. The final race, the race against nature, had begun. The sound of a second engine echoed. Soon after, the veterinary truck arrived, bringing experts and medical equipment. Their professionalism and calmness offered an absolute sense of security. They quickly assessed Zara's condition. No surgery needed, but immediate fluid therapy was required to combat heat shock. The scene focused on the subtlety of the rescue action. Instead of scalpels, the veterinarians carefully inserted a 4-line into a vein in Zara's neck. Elias and the team provided maximum shade for the mare. Keto was anxious, constantly circling its mother, but was gently held back by Elias. He placed his hand on Keto's back, directing the foal's gaze toward the steady drops of fluid dripping in the forebag. "Every drop is a little bit of strength returned to your mother, Keto. They are helping her survive," Elias said, his voice full of hope. Life was being transmitted through a thin tube. After 2 large bags of electrolyte-filled fluids were administered, Zara began to show positive responses. Her eyes opened wider, her breathing less labored. This was the moment everyone was waiting for. With gentle assistance from the veterinary team, Zara slowly raised her heavy body. She stood up. She was not physically injured. She had only been overcome by nature. She stood firmly on her feet, becoming steadier with each passing minute. She turned her head, looking at Elias and the rescue team gratefully, then gently nuzzled Keto. That wordless reunion was the greatest reward for everyone. Over the next week, Elias became the personal caregiver for the mother and foal. He visited daily, ensuring Zara had enough supportive water and feed, and administered necessary vitamin supplements. Keto now trusted him completely. Upon hearing the jeep, the foal would run out to greet him, whinnying happily. Zara grew stronger. She could now forage for food and water on her own, and the vibrancy of her stripes had returned to her coat. The day of farewell finally arrived. As the sun set, painting the savanna gold, Zara's zebra herd finally returned. Hundreds of stripes moved like a wave. Zara lifted her head high, letting out a call to the herd. Keto ran to its mother's side. Before leaving, Zara and Keto looked back toward Elias, a deep glance of gratitude. Keto rubbed its wet nose against Elias's hand one last time, a farewell. Elias stood there, watching the mother and foal merge into the moving stream of stripes heading toward the horizon. From two solitary individuals, they had now become part of a collective strength. To save one life is to save an entire world. If this story of connection and quiet courage has touched your heart, please share it. Every share is a commitment to helping people like Elias continue their mission. Your support is the life-saving water for the tiny creatures on the savannah. Join us in preserving hope. It was midday, and the African sun was pouring fire, enveloping the Malamala Game Reserve in a fierce, brutal heat. The heat was not just a temperature. It was an invisible predator, forcing every creature to seek shelter or surrender to exhaustion. The air was eerily still, broken only by the incessant buzzing of insects under the parched scrub. On a barren mound of earth, devoid of any shade, lay a figure as still as a bronze statue, covered in dust and weariness. This was Gideon, the old baboon. His fur was faded, and his body was gaunt from the long struggle against age and hunger. The troop had been forced to leave Gideon behind because he no longer had the strength to withstand the heat and the long journey of survival. He sat there, exposed to the intense heat, neither running nor resisting. He knew that the heat and the solitude would end his life faster than any predator. But in Gideon's deep-set eyes, there was no fear, only the dignified acceptance of a warrior who had reached the end of his days. And then, two sand-colored shadows appeared in the distance, moving slowly but with immense power. They were Kaiser, the male lion with the dark mane, and Leona, the lioness with the muscular build, both taking advantage of the prey's weakened state under the devastating sun. Their eyes, cold and full of hunger, converged on Gideon's lonely form. The circle of destiny, reinforced by the day's cruel heat, was closing in. Kaiser and Leona were not in a hurry. They moved slowly, savoring every moment of their dominance. Kaiser, with his thick black mane casting a shadow over his shoulders, led the way. Leona followed behind, like a drawn arrow, ready to strike whenever the leader gave the signal. Their sand-colored coats were nearly invisible in the blazing sun. Only the heavy, deliberate steps on the dry ground betrayed their deadly presence. Gideon remained still. The old baboon had used his last ounce of strength to maintain this dignified posture. His body was tragically small compared to Kaiser's immense bulk. The distance narrowed. 20 meters, 10 meters, and then only 5 meters. Kaiser finally stopped. He lowered his head, his amber eyes fixed directly on Gideon. In this moment, Gideon no longer saw Kaiser as merely a predator. He saw the reflection of the law, of the unchangeable circle of life and death. And Kaiser also sensed something unusual. He had hunted hundreds of prey, and there was always fear, trembling, and resistance in their eyes. But here, in the eyes of this old baboon, there was only composure. The stillness made Kaiser hesitate. He let out a small growl, testing to see if the prey still had any instinct to flee. But Gideon did not move. The old baboon simply closed his eyes slightly, as if savoring the last wave of hot air. In that frozen moment of confrontation, Gideon's mind flashed through memories. The cool feeling of morning dew when he was young, the warmth of protecting his troop, and the pain of losing loved ones. It was a complete life. He had lived, fought, and loved. And now it was time to rest. The exhaustion of the body had dissolved all fear. Leona did not understand the delay. She tilted her head slightly, restless. She took a step forward, ready to leap. But Kaiser raised his foreleg, stopping her with a stern look. Kaiser, accustomed to the chaos of the hunt, suddenly respected the peace Gideon was bringing. Old Gideon looked up at the scorching sky, where the midday sun stood fierce as a final verdict. He took a heavy breath, inhaling the smell of dust, dryness, and lion. He bowed his head forward, seemingly offering himself. His life was about to end under this blazing sun, but he had chosen to conclude it with dignity, not with cowardice. Kaiser began to move closer, opening his jaws. Just as Kaiser was preparing to deliver the final blow, nearly a kilometer away, Ranger Sarah was conducting her midday patrol. She was an American, but her spirit had fully assimilated into the rhythm of the African savanna. Sarah was the image of dedication. Neatly tied hair, a sweat-soaked khaki uniform, and eyes always sharp beneath the wide-brimmed hat. She knew that midday was the most dangerous time, not just because of the potentially fatal temperature, but because it was when the weakest creatures revealed their vulnerability. Sarah's Jeep was moving slowly through the sun-scorched grassland. Her hand was on the steering wheel, her eyes on the binoculars. Although accustomed to witnessing death in nature, her heart always carried a deep sense of compassion. She swept the binoculars across a patch of open ground and suddenly stopped. Under the glaring sun, she saw an unusual cluster of sand-colored shapes focused on a small mound. Through the lens, the scene of life and death was clear. Kaiser and Leona standing near an old baboon. What chilled Sarah was not the act of hunting, but the stillness of the prey. The baboon was sitting. It was not trying to run. Sarah immediately recognized Gideon, the old baboon her team had been monitoring due to his frail condition. Gideon was so exhausted that he had accepted death. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her internal struggle intense. The first, inviolable rule of the reserve was, do not interfere with the natural hunting process. That was the law that had kept this ecosystem balanced for millennia. But was this natural? Or was it a cruel combination of disease, old age, and extreme temperature that had stripped away every chance of survival? In a split second, Sarah told herself, Gideon had lived a full life. He deserved an ending that wasn't based on helplessness. She could not stand by and watch an old creature, who had already accepted his fate, endure the agony of a chase. Compassion outweighed all rules. She decided she would not save him from death. She would save him from the cruelty of death. One more day, Gideon. You deserve one more day, Sarah muttered. She quickly prepared. She turned on the headlights, even under the blinding sun, to create a dazzling, distracting effect. Her hand went to the car horn. The decision had been made. She gripped the gear shift, and the Jeep, carrying the will of a human, began to accelerate directly toward the life and death standoff. The engine roared in the midday heat, a countercry to the silent laws of nature. The sudden roar of the diesel engine and the abrupt appearance of the Jeep tore through the stillness of the confrontation. Kaiser, just about to strike the final blow, suddenly froze, his large ears swiveling toward the sound. Leona, always more cautious, immediately backed away. The Jeep's headlights, despite the daylight, created a blinding glare, combined with the sunlight, aimed directly at their eyes, causing discomfort and dazzling them. Sarah maintained a steady speed, not so fast as to lose control, but strong enough to create a sense of threat. She continuously blasted the car horn, a long, piercing sound, utterly foreign and not belonging to this world of predation. The presence of a human, combined with this weapon of light and sound, shattered the lion's plan. Kaiser lifted his head, his amber eyes narrowed, staring at the approaching vehicle. He was not afraid of the car, but he hated the inconvenience. Kaiser's hunting law was simple: efficiency and energy conservation. An old, frail baboon was not worth having to deal with an annoying and unpredictable distraction. He let out an angry growl, directed at Sarah as a warning. Sarah did not flinch. She kept the horn and headlights on. This was a battle of wills, not of brute strength. After a few moments of hesitation, Kaiser made his decision. With an irritated shake of his head, he turned his back, his magnificent mane shifting. Leona quickly followed, and both silently retreated into the shade of a cluster of trees a few hundred meters away, vanishing as quickly as mirages. The air became still again, broken only by the low rumble of the Jeep's engine. Sarah turned off the engine and waited another minute, ensuring that Kaiser and Leona were far away and no longer felt threatened. She stepped out of the vehicle. The immediate silence after the noise created a powerful contrast. Sarah walked cautiously toward Gideon. The old baboon was still sitting there, trembling slightly. He had not run when the lions retreated, and he did not run now as Sarah approached. He looked at her with tired eyes, not with fear, but with confusion and perhaps gratitude. Sarah knelt down a few steps away from him, her voice soft and reassuring, completely different from the car horn. "It's all right, old friend. I'm going to take you." She took her water bottle from her backpack and slowly poured a little water into the palm of her hand. Gideon looked up, hesitating. Finally, the instinct for survival won. The frail baboon reached out his hand, licking every drop of the cool water. It was not just water, it was life. Sarah performed a quick check. He was only exhausted and dehydrated, with no serious injuries. A sigh of relief escaped Sarah. She had succeeded, not by fighting nature, but by listening to her own conscience. With Kaiser and Leona's retreat, silence returned, but it was a different silence, a silence of survival. Sarah approached Gideon, exhaling softly to see the baboon was still intact. She spoke quietly, her voice blending with the midday sun. "That's it, old friend. It's over." Getting Gideon into the car was not easy. The baboon was too weak to walk on his own, but his wild instincts still made him wary of humans. Sarah had to move slowly, reassuring him with her voice and gentle gestures. She spread a soft blanket on the back seat and gently helped him up. She shielded Gideon from the sun with a thin tarp, ensuring he was in the coolest environment possible. The Jeep left the barren mound, carrying a life that had just escaped the jaws of death. Throughout the drive back to the ranger station, Sarah contemplated. She knew she had broken a rule, but she wondered, was not compassion also a rule of nature, a rule of humanity? Her action was not a defiance of a law, but a tribute to a life fully lived. She could not save every old and weak animal, but she had saved Gideon. And sometimes, saving one individual is enough to affirm the value of all life. Back at the station, Gideon was immediately attended to by the medical team. He was given 4 fluids to combat dehydration and provided with easily digestible food. In a treatment room, Gideon no longer had to sit upright, facing death. He lay on a soft cushion, his eyes closed in the first deep and peaceful sleep in days. It was serenity, it was release. The story of Gideon and Sarah is not just a dramatic moment in the reserve. It is a powerful message to all of us. Our lives are also full of Kaisers and Leonas, challenges, pressures, moments of exhaustion that seem impossible to withstand. Like Gideon, there are times when we feel we must give up. But this story reminds us that hope often comes from the most unexpected places, a sudden light, an act of intervention by kindness. Sarah, through her courage and compassion, gave Gideon the gift of one more day. Gideon's life may not extend for many months, but his remaining days will not be his final, desperate days under a predator's claws. He will live in safety, loved and respected. His story is a reminder that conservation is not just about protecting species, but also about protecting the spirit of life, the spirit that does not surrender to harshness. If the story of Gideon and Ranger Sarah's actions touched your heart, remember that we all have the power to be the Jeep's headlights in someone else's life. Please share this story to spread the message of connection and humanity. Never underestimate the power of a kind heart. Ask yourself, what will you do with the gift of one more day you are given? The Omo River, also known as the Serpent River, churned violently under the midday sun. This was a land where life and death were defined by primordial, unforgiving laws. The water was dark, thick, and flowed fiercely, a constant reminder of the invisible danger lurking beneath. On a day like any other, amidst that ferocity, a contrasting sight drew all eyes. A brilliant, delicate golden butterfly, fluttering slowly over the water surface. Where there is fragile life, there is attention. And the lion cub Leo, only a few months old, was mesmerized by that shimmering gold. In a moment of innocent, reckless curiosity, Leo chased the butterfly right to the edge of the slippery rocky bank. A single careless slip, and the cub plunged into the icy water. Amidst the roar of the current, Leo desperately grasped a piece of floating driftwood, a makeshift raft in an ocean of fear. This was Leo, and a single moment of curiosity had set him adrift in the vortex of an ancient fear. Not far away, Alara, the park ranger, was silently patrolling with her four-legged companion, Max the dog. Alara didn't come to Omo to confront nature. She came to protect its delicate balance. In her pocket, she carried the park's strict law. Do not interfere in predator-prey encounters. But in her heart, she carried a different principle: compassion. She believed that sometimes human intervention wasn't about breaking the law, but about pulling a golden thread that connected life in a chain of desperate moments. Max suddenly stopped, his body rigid, ears perked toward the river. Beneath the dark surface, a massive shadow began to move. It was Scar, the oldest, largest, and most dangerous crocodile of the Serpent River. It had spotted its solitary, easy prey. The time had come for Alara to face her toughest choice. Max's low growl was an unmistakable warning. Alara, the park ranger, quickly raised her binoculars. It took her a few seconds to penetrate the blinding glare reflecting off the water. But when the image sharpened, she recognized the unfolding tragedy. The driftwood, the small, soaking wet lion cub Leo clinging to it, trembling. And most importantly, she saw the dark mass approaching, Scar. The crocodile did not move fast, but the certainty in its every movement was more terrifying than speed. It advanced like a submerged submarine, leaving only faint ripples on the water surface. Scar relied on stealth and fear. It was closing the distance. Through the lens, Alara could clearly see Leo's desperate, golden eyes. The cub began to shake violently, not from a cold, but from sheer terror. A small, choked plea escaped its throat, a hopeless cry sent into the open air. Alara knew she was standing at a difficult moral crossroads. The reserve's law was clearly etched, strictly prohibited to interfere with the natural process between predator and prey. Violating this rule could cost her the career she had spent her life building. She was a conservation expert. She understood that human intervention could have unpredictable consequences for the ecosystem. Yet, staring directly into the absolute horror on Leo's face through her binoculars, Alara couldn't stand idly by. This wasn't just survival. It was a massacre, and she had the means to prevent it. She didn't see prey. She saw a small creature facing an undeserved death. Scar suddenly accelerated. Its massive snout began to break the surface. Its rough, scaled skin, dull yellow eyes, and jagged jaws were now clearly visible. The moment of confrontation had arrived. Leo let out a final, desperate scream, clinging to the driftwood with all his remaining strength. In a split second, Alara had to make a decision that would change not only Leo's fate, but her own career. She looked at Max, who stood perfectly still, sharp eyes awaiting a command. Leo's life was measured in seconds. Alara took a deep breath, cast aside the cold rules, and chose to act based on compassion. Time seemed to freeze on the Serpent River. Scar's snout was mere feet from the driftwood. The razor-sharp jaws were ready to snap shut. Leo the cub could only cling and scream in vain. Alara knew she had run out of time to weigh ethics against regulations. If Leo died, he would die because of her hesitation. She couldn't shoot the crocodile directly without endangering Leo or escalating the conflict. She needed a non-lethal intervention that would create absolute chaos. She quickly retrieved the emergency flare gun from her backpack. Alara aimed, not at Scar, but at the murky water right next to its snout. She pulled the trigger, piercing his tore through the deadly silence of the wilderness. The flare shot out and hit the water with a loud sizzle, instantly erupting into a blinding stream of crimson light and thick smoke. The sight was stunning. The intense red fire vividly illuminated the dark water and the crocodile's scaly hide. Scar recoiled violently. As a creature that relied on stealth and shadow, its ancient mind was completely overwhelmed by this alien, unnatural sight and sound. The killing bite missed its target. It submerged slightly, hiding in the murky water, confused by the heat and the dazzling light. This sonic and visual intervention lasted only seconds, but it was the precious time Alara needed. She turned to Max, her eyes conveying a silent but intense command. "Go, Max, save him." Max didn't need a second order. With incredible speed and power, the German Shepherd plunged straight into the dangerous Homo River. Despite being an alien environment for an onshore patrol dog, Max did not hesitate. He swam like a torpedo, creating powerful wakes as he headed straight for the driftwood. Alara watched Max's every action, her heart pounding in her chest. The dog was swimming, not to fight Scar, but to implement the shield strategy. Max reached the driftwood, barking loudly to keep the crocodile's attention. Then, he used his wet nose to gently but firmly nudge Leo, an urgent offer of help, a guide to safety. Leo, completely exhausted and disoriented, stared into Max's steady eyes. The cub did what instinct should have forbidden. He let go of the driftwood. Leo entrusted his life to this strange, non-threatening creature. With a final burst of strength, he began to swim alongside Max. Max circled Leo, placing his body between the cub and where Scar had just submerged. The rescue was not a battle, but a protective escort. Finally, Alara sighed in relief as the weak cub and the strong Max emerged onto the muddy riverbed, where ancient tree roots formed a natural barrier. Scar, realizing it had been outsmarted and deterred by the presence of the two intruders on the bank, fully submerged, retreating into the river's depths. Leo was safe. Leo dragged his exhausted body onto the mud, gasping for air. His whole body trembled uncontrollably. He was saved, but the shock of the near-death encounter was still evident. Alara quickly approached, keeping Max slightly behind. She knew that even though Max had just saved Leo's life, the cub's wild instinct might see the dog as the next threat. She needed to maintain distance, respecting the fragile boundary between intervention and intrusion. In the moment of silence, with only the sound of the flowing river and Leo's labored breaths, something extraordinary happened. The cub and the dog looked at each other. It wasn't the gaze of enemies or predator and prey. Max stood firm, his eyes conveying calm and relief. Leo looked back, not with aggression, but with confusion and perhaps a glimmer of instinctive gratitude. After the most terrifying moments of his life, the cub recognized that this strange, four-legged creature meant him no harm. Alara knelt down, assessing Leo's condition from a distance through her binoculars. She noted a small scratch on his leg, but more importantly, the flame of survival in his eyes had not extinguished. She gently stroked Max's head, whispering words of praise. The dog responded with a slight tail wag, seemingly understanding that the most dangerous task was complete. But the moment of peace did not last long. Suddenly, Alara heard a loud roar echoing from the thick bush. The roar was not a sign of attack, but the frantic, desperate call of a mother searching for her lost child. "It's his mother," Alara whispered, relieved. Just minutes later, the riverside reeds were torn apart, and the lioness Serafina appeared. She was a large, powerful female, her eyes burning with anxiety. She rushed to Leo, completely ignoring the presence of Alara and Max. The reunion was emotional. Serafina gently nudged her snout against Leo, licking her son's soaking wet fur, reassuring him with warm rumbles. Leo nestled into his mother, all tension dissolving in the familiar warmth. Alara signaled Max to retreat further, hiding in the tall grass so as not to disturb this sacred moment. She had accomplished her mission, holding the line between life and death long enough for the law of nature, the law of maternal love, to prevail. After Leo was safely nestled beside his mother Serafina, the pair silently retreated, disappearing deep into the bush. In a final moment, Leo turned his head, seemingly registering the image of the two strangers who had prevented him from succumbing to death. Alara and Max remained still on the muddy riverbank. The reunion they had just witnessed was not just the end of a rescue. It was the confirmation of the belief Alara had always held. Moral intervention doesn't ruin the laws of nature, but sometimes it is the prerequisite for those laws to continue. Alara gently patted Max's flank. The German Shepherd didn't understand the complexities of ethics or conservation law, but he acted on pure loyalty and courage. Max was living proof that bravery is not limited by species, and conviction can overcome all survival instincts. In that moment, Max was more than a working dog. He was a guardian angel sent from the other side of the civilized world. The survival of the cub Leo was a profound lesson for Alara and for everyone about the limits of indifference. Alara realized that the boundary between letting nature take its course and saving a life is incredibly fragile, but she believed she had made the right choice. She chose to act based on compassion, an element often forgotten in the harsh world of survival. Now, the story sends a powerful message to the outside world. We all face our own serpent river, those moments when we feel isolated, exhausted, clinging to our own makeshift driftwood, facing the scar of our lives. It could be illness, failure, or sudden crisis. This story reminds us we are not meant to face those moments alone. Intervention, compassion, and connection, whether from family, friends, or a stranger, are indispensable sources of strength that allow us to overcome. Alara and the other rangers are the guardians of that belief. They're the last line of defense, protecting vulnerable creatures like the cub Leo, acting not for fame, but out of love and responsibility for life. They need support from the global community. The setting sun painted the sky red. Alara stowed her flare gun and walked away with Max. Behind them, the river flowed on, telling the tale of a lion-cub rescue, a heroic dog, and a woman who dared to cross the boundary of silence. The survival of one species often depends on the intervention of another. This is the improbable alliance forged on the banks of the Omo River. Let this story be your reminder to seek out the life that needs saving, even if it is not a lion cub. That is what truly defines us. If this story touched you, if you believe in the power of a compassionate act, please support the global conservation community. Like this video, subscribe to the channel for more whispers from the wild, and let us know in the comments. Who is your Max in this life? It was a scorching July afternoon in the heart of the Bronx Zoo, New York. Families were enjoying ice cream. Balloons bobbed on a gentle breeze, creating a picture of a typical Sunday. Suddenly, a deafening, metallic shriek tore through the air. The rusted steel of the lion enclosure fence had given way with a terrifying groan, silencing the crowd. 300 visitors simultaneously turned their heads, their weekend smiles replaced by looks of utter horror. A colossal African lion, his mane dark and deep, Casper, stepped through the twisted debris with the deadly, fluid grace of a king never forgetting his instinct. Screams erupted. Security guards bellowed into walkie-talkies. People scattered, but amidst the chaos, sitting on an old wooden bench, an elderly man with pale blue eyes, Arthur Miller, did not move. His gaze was locked onto the majestic beast more than 60 feet away. The lion let out a roar, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the concrete pavement. And then, Casper began to move, not toward the fleeing crowd, but toward the sole, stationary figure. This is the story of a bond that defied biology, a secret spanning 22 years, and a silent question. Could a king remember the hand that saved his life? The story winds back 22 years, taking us to Brooklyn, New York. Arthur Miller was a semi-retired machinist, living a lonely and weary life in his late 40s after his wife, Eleanor, passed away. He resided in a cramped apartment in the Red Hook area, where the clamor of the port was his only companion. His life was a methodical series of solitary days, waking early, making coffee, reading the paper slowly, and only leaving the house when absolutely necessary. Brief Christmas email greetings from his son in Oregon were his only tenuous link to the outside world. This strict routine served as Arthur's shield against the emptiness in his heart. One cold autumn night, thick fog blanketed the docks. Arthur was cleaning his workshop late when he heard a faint, desperate whimpering coming from the stacked containers. The air smelled faintly of diesel and salty seawater. Donning his greasy, soiled jacket, Arthur used a flashlight to search the damp darkness. His heart was beating strangely fast. The whimpering came again, fainter this time, but more urgent. He found a broken wooden crate wedged between two containers. The lid had a large crack, and dirty straw spilled out around it. And inside, trembling violently, was a lion cub. It couldn't have been more than 2 months old. Its golden coat was soaked in feces and urine, its pale blue eyes barely open with exhaustion. A leather collar was cinched tightly around its soft neck, leaving the surrounding skin red and chafed, evidence that it had been abandoned in this state for too long. Clearly, this was the fallout of a failed, illegal exotic pet trade. "My God," Arthur whispered, kneeling on the wet ground. He knew immediately what he should do: call the police or animal control. But he also pictured the scenario. The cub would be locked up, endure countless investigative procedures, and perhaps slowly die in bureaucratic limbo before finding refuge. "No," he mumbled, taking off his thick coat. "I won't leave you here." He wrapped the shivering cub in his coat, feeling the tiny, convulsing body press against his chest. It was freezing and lighter than a puppy. Arthur hurried it back to his apartment. He made a temporary bed on the bathroom floor with old blankets, gently set the cub down, then warmed milk, mixing in a little honey. The cub drank slowly, with difficulty. Its pale blue eyes were fixed on Arthur's face, and something passed between them, a recognition between two lonely souls. "I'll call you Casper," Arthur said, smiling sadly, like the lost boy in the fairy tale. And so, the strangest and most wonderful period of Arthur's life began. He called in sick to work, confining himself to the apartment to care for Casper. He applied antibiotic ointment to the neck wound, changing the bandage 3 times a day. With each passing day, Casper grew stronger. Within 2 weeks, he could stand. Within a month, he began to play with Arthur's shoelaces, attacking them with humorous seriousness. Casper was not just a cared-for animal. He was a companion. He followed Arthur from room to room, lay at his feet when he read the paper, and curled up on his stomach on cold nights. His deep purr vibrated the coffee cup on the table, and a long-absent smile returned to Arthur's face. However, Casper was growing frighteningly fast. Arthur knew the moment of reckoning was approaching. The decisive event occurred when Casper was 4 months old. Arthur was preparing lunch when he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. He dropped the knife, staggering to hold onto the sink. The kitchen spun, and his legs gave way onto the cold tile. Heart attack, he thought with strange clarity. "I'm going to die alone." But then, he felt a warmth press against his side. Casper, now about 80 pounds, had laid down next to him. He wasn't playing or curious. He simply lay there, his warm body pressed against the man's trembling form. And Casper began to purr, that deep sound, as if trying to vibrate the pain out of Arthur's chest. He buried his face in Casper's soft fur, burst into tears. The pain subsided after a few long minutes. It was only angina, but Casper's instinctive gesture, that unconditional comfort, broke something inside Arthur. This wild animal, who should have seen him as prey, was offering him love and presence. But reality hit just days later. Mr. Johnson, the downstairs neighbor, pounded violently on the door. "Miller, what large animal are you keeping in there?" My wife heard roaring.
Mr.
Arthur
Johnson,
tried to
wait,
explain
wait.
it was the TV, but Mr.
I can
Johnson
explain.
pushed the door open and froze. Casper was standing in the middle of the living room, his mane beginning to grow, already the size of a grown Labrador. "Oh my God, you're keeping a lion in the apartment." Mr. Johnson screamed and bolted down the stairs. Arthur slammed the door shut, leaning his back against it, his hands shaking. "It's over, Casper,"
Casper.
he whispered, stroking the soft, round ears. "They'll come for me, and they'll take you away." And they came.
Open the door.
The
We have a warrant
police,
for inspection.
animal control, and a veterinarian from the Bronx Zoo. Arthur explained everything. Finding Casper, the fear he would die in bureaucratic red tape, and the 4 months he kept him hidden. They listened with stern faces. Mr. Miller, the vet, a Dr. Weber, said, "You broke the law, but you clearly saved his life." Arthur pleaded through tears, "He's my family." Dr. Weber replied, gently, "He is a lion, 80 pounds now, and will grow to 450 pounds. In 6 months, he could kill you even just by playing. You know that." Arthur knew, but the heart does not follow logic. Finally, a deal was struck. Casper would go to the Bronx Zoo, one of the best facilities in America. Arthur would not face criminal prosecution for his life-saving actions, but he was never allowed to own an exotic animal again. That last night, Arthur sat on the floor, Casper's head in his lap. The lion seemed to sense the change. "You'll have a good life," Arthur choked out. "Lots of space, good food, maybe even a lioness. All the things I can't give you." The next morning, when the zoo personnel arrived with the transport crate, Casper growled defensively. But Arthur soothed him, gently guiding him inside. The last lie he told him was, "It's going to be okay." Arthur moved to a small apartment in the Bronx, close to the zoo. He justified it as a new job opportunity, but the truth was he couldn't leave Casper. Every Sunday, he bought a ticket and sat on his familiar bench near the African lion exhibit. Casper, though integrated with the pride, always appeared when Arthur arrived, sitting opposite the glass barrier, staring at the elderly man. It was the silent acknowledgement that lasted 22 years, separated by thick glass and an unchangeable reality. We returned to that fateful July afternoon. The zoo was in unprecedented chaos. Casper, a nearly 450-pound mass of muscle, let out a terrifying roar. The roar was not just a sound. It was a shockwave, turning panic into sheer terror. In the middle of the plaza, a child of about 5, separated from his parents in the crush, stood motionless, completely paralyzed by fear, directly in Casper's path. The lion fixed its attention on the child and began to take slow, predatory steps. And then, Arthur Miller stood up. He ignored the screams of the guards and the sharp pain in his back. His trembling body moved on instinct. "Casper!" His voice was hoarse, weak with age, but it cut through the screaming and echoed across the plaza. Something unbelievable happened. The lion stopped. Its massive head whipped around, ears perked in search, its gaze sweeping the panicked square until they found that familiar, gaunt figure. Time seemed to freeze. Arthur began to walk toward the lion, despite the violent shaking of his legs. "Casper," he repeated, softer this time, his voice breaking. "It's me, your silly old friend." The lion took a step toward Arthur, then another, its eyes never leaving his face. There was no aggression, only the assessment of a predator. Less than a meter away, Arthur could smell the warm, distinctive scent of the predator mingled with a familiar, suffocating odor. He saw the silver threads mixed into Casper's dark mane. His hands were trembling so badly he had to press them tightly against his thighs. "My friend," he whispered, "my old friend." And Casper acted. It wasn't an attack. It was an action anyone who has owned a cat recognizes. The massive, magnificent lion simply walked up and rubbed its huge head against Arthur's chest, pushing so hard it nearly knocked the man over had Casper not braced him. It began to purr. The sound drowned out everything else, shaking the very ground. It was the exact purr from 22 years ago, amplified by 450 pounds of muscle and instinct. Arthur sobbed, wrapping his arms around the lion's thick neck, his fingers sinking deep into the dense mane. Casper licked his tear-streaked face with a rough tongue, rubbing to mark Arthur with a scent, demanding closeness not with aggression, but with affection. "You've gotten so big." Arthur laughed through his tears. "I visit you every Sunday. Did you know?" Casper rumbled in response, not a threat, but a confirmation. Then he lay down at Arthur's feet, his head resting on his front paws, the exact position he used to demand petting as a cub. The zoo staff finally dared to approach. The veterinarian asked Arthur, his voice strained, "Mr. Miller, what is happening?" Arthur looked up, his face still wet. "I saved him as a cub 22 years ago." And he remembered. Arthur, now steady by Casper, spoke softly to him. "Casper, you have to go back. It's not fair, but it's where you're safe." The lion rumbled one last time. Then, with the natural grace of a big cat, he stepped back toward the enclosure. He turned his head once, his gaze locking with Arthur's, a silent farewell. The story spread. By the end of the day, it was national news. Lion recognizes rescuer after 22 years. The video of Casper purring and embracing Arthur went viral worldwide. Arthur was interviewed, photographed, and lauded, but all he wanted was to return to his familiar wooden bench. Following the extraordinary event, a new arrangement was established. The zoo director understood that this bond could not be broken. Arthur was granted special permission. Supervised private visits to Casper's back-of-house area every Thursday morning when the zoo was closed for maintenance. And so, a new routine was formed. Every Thursday morning, Arthur walked into the concrete corridor leading to Casper's inner enclosure. And without fail, Casper was always there waiting. He came to the internal barrier, rubbed against it, and began to purr, a sound that made the walls vibrate. Arthur stood there for hours, talking softly, telling Casper about his week, the weather, old memories. Casper listened, eyes half closed, perfectly relaxed and content. This simple act completed Arthur's solitary life. 3 months after that memorable Sunday, on a cold October Thursday morning, Arthur arrived earlier than usual. His heart condition was worsening. Doctors had warned, but he ignored them. He had one last visit to make. Casper was waiting, as always. But this time, as their eyes met across the bars, a quiet understanding, an unspoken goodbye, passed between them. Arthur laboriously sat down on the cold cement floor, ignoring the veterinarian's caution. His hand reached through the bars, sinking deep into Casper's soft mane. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice weak. "Thank you for everything. For showing me that true love needs no words, no logic. It simply exists." Casper pressed his head firmly into Arthur's trembling hand, purring softly. And there, in that cold concrete corridor, the old man closed his eyes, smiling. They found Arthur a few minutes later, still smiling, his hand still resting on Casper's fur. And the lion lay directly opposite, his head pressed tightly against the spot where Arthur's hand had been, guarding his friend one last time. This story is a testament that the deepest connections can transcend species barriers, distance, and time. It reminds us that unconditional love and true recognition are life's greatest comforts. If Arthur and Casper taught us anything, it is that a single moment of kindness can echo through an entire lifetime. Don't let a small act of connection pass you by today. Share this story to remind someone that true recognition is worth the wait. And tell us in the comments, what unexpected bond changed your life? For 2 brilliant decades, he was the shadow cast upon the tall grass, the undisputed sovereign of the savannah. Leo, the name echoed power, the symbol of unshakable strength. His black, thick, scarred mane, a heavy crown of battles past. He was the king, but time, inevitably, always collects its debts, even from the Lord of the Beasts. Under the cruel, blinding glare of the setting sun, where he once roared with pride, the king fell. A severe leg injury rendered him unable to hunt, exhausted from hunger and abandoned by his own pride after his defeat. Leo was now a solitary shadow. The ancient law of the wild is merciless. Weakness immediately attracts predators. But his attackers were not the familiar hunters. They were baboons, his adversaries, his persistent pests. Led by Keto, the dominant male who harbored a bitter, personal vendetta against Leo. They encircled him, forming a mocking ring. The piercing, incessant cries of the troop sounded like an undeniable sentence, determined to end Leo's reign. Leo used his last ounce of strength, attempting to stand, but only met with excruciating pain. He collapsed, despair overwhelming him. Then Leo did something utterly unbelievable. He did not fight, nor did he roar. He surrendered. He placed his proud head down on the dusty ground and closed his eyes, completely giving up. What happened next? You would never believe the fierce yet tender truth and the profound loyalty in this final act. To truly grasp the tragedy of this moment, the surrender of a king, we must understand the burden Leo carried. His black, thick, and magnificent mane was not just hair. It was a map of honor, recording every battle won, every mortal challenge overcome. He was the embodiment of absolute power, a dominating symbol that no creature dared to question. Yet, the price of that throne was prolonged loneliness. Throughout his peak years, there was one single soul who truly saw past Leo's regal exterior, Mara. She was his longest-standing mate, the one who shared his successful hunts and the long, quiet nights on their familiar mounts. When a younger, stronger male lion defeated Leo and took over the pride, Mara, by the cruel rule of nature, was compelled to follow the new pride. But her soul, her deep connection, remained bound to the former king. She became the silent witness to his downfall, always maintaining a painful, respectful distance, watching Leo's heavy, solitary steps from afar. And today, Leo's body had completely given up. The fatal leg wound from the failed territorial defense battle had finally made him unable to hunt. Hunger and dehydration had drained all his strength, pushing him to the brink. He had collapsed openly, a clear invitation sent to the harsh wild world. This was not a temporary rest. This was relinquishment, an acceptance of the inevitable fate. Amidst this despair, Keto appeared. For most of the baboon troop, this was merely an opportunity to harass and eliminate a dying threat. But for Keto, it was personal, the settlement of a blood debt that had lasted for years. In a moment of arrogance and hunger, Leo had hunted and killed Keto's cub. That loss and the suppressed rage had never subsided in the dominant male's heart. Keto didn't just want Leo gone. They wanted to see Leo suffer, to kneel before its vengeance. The circle gradually tightened. Keto's personal grudge fueled the collective aggression of the entire troop. They were not brave. They were merely reacting to a primal call. The king was weak, and the old order must be mocked before it completely collapses. Their shrill, noisy cries were not just warnings. They were the cheers of victory for an age about to end. Collective strength versus absolute solitude. The entire baboon troop formed a living wall, besieging the dying king, ready to witness his final moments. The taunts began. It was a symphony of cruelty and glee. The baboons incessantly threw small handfuls of dirt and pebbles. Their piercing cries formed a dense sonic barrier around Leo, a stark contrast to his weak, shaky breaths. Leo tried, once more, a final desperate attempt to stand tall. His entire aging body tensed, muscles coiling beneath the loose skin, but the effort only revealed the extreme pain from the wound more clearly. A hoarse, ragged sound escaped his chest. Not a powerful roar, but a failed, painful cough. The physical pain was too immense, crushing his last fighting will. He collapsed to the ground again. It was in that moment that Leo made his final choice. Not to die in a hopeless battle, but to choose to retain his dignity in surrender. He lowered his distinguished head, allowing his thick black mane to touch the scorching dust. He closed his eyes. It was a clear signal of the end, a silent confession to the wild world. I have no strength left to fight. This was the surrender that was recorded. It was the moment of greatest weakness and vulnerability for a creature that was once the apex of the food chain. In the absolute stillness within himself, Leo drifted into memories. He no longer heard the triumphant jeers of the baboon troop or felt the burning heat of the sun. He immersed himself in the images of his glorious days, of successful hunts, and especially the moment when Mara and he shared a kill under the moonlight, their wordless yet profound connection. It was preparation for the final, dark sleep. He had let go of fear, leaving only emptiness and boundless exhaustion. Keto, completely consumed by the years of suppressed rage, moved closer. It was more than just a baboon. It was the vengeance of the past, the representative of everything Leo had done during his peak of power. Keto did not see a king. It only saw a dying former enemy. And this was its chance to deliver the final blow. A blow not aimed to kill, but to humiliate, to erase the lingering wound. The tension in the air became suffocating. Keto raised its hand, ready to strike down. By the laws of nature, the scenario should end in brutality. The enemy would have its revenge, and the king would fall. But in the wild, sometimes the existence of love and connection is what writes the final chapter, a chapter entirely different, defying all predictions. Just as Keto, eyes blazing with hatred, prepared to deliver the final, humiliating strike, an unexpected shadow fell upon the crowd. It was a sharp, decisive movement from the thicket behind. A figure emerged not with the haste of a predator, but with the steadfastness of a guardian. Mara. She did not snarl, nor did she charge in with the intention to fight. She simply walked out, slowly, dusted and tired from her long, silent journey of observation. Her appearance was not a coincidence. It was the consequence of the enduring and deep bond they shared throughout their lives. Mara walked straight in, placing her body like a solid wall between the baboon troop and her dying mate. Mara was also exhausted. She was alone, without the support of her pride. But she did not collapse. Her eyes, though weary, shone with an unshakable determination. She did not waste her precious energy on a meaningless challenge roar. Instead, Mara created a unique sound, a soft, hoarse hiss, loaded with pain, but also with protection. It was not a battle cry, but the protective growl of love, a fierce, poignant sound that could not be ignored. Keto stood frozen. Surprise and confusion dissolved the blind rage. This was no longer the easy massacre it had expected. This was a confrontation with absolute loyalty. Keto looked at Leo, then at Mara. The personal vendetta it yearned to settle suddenly became small and trivial when faced with the profound, quiet devotion Mara was exhibiting. Keto, despite being the enemy, was guided by its survival instinct and its understanding of the wild's rules to recognize something primal and sacred. It understood that continuing this siege would be futile and dangerous. A lioness's loyalty was something that violence could not defeat. Keto slowly lowered its gaze, then gently signaled the entire troop to retreat. The long and bitter siege ended not with a brutal blow, but with a silent acknowledgement. Keto led the baboon troop away, granting Leo one final, unexpected gift, dignity. The baboons turned their backs on the king they hated, simply because one lioness loved him more. The unbelievable had happened. Love had intervened, transforming a shameful surrender into a dignified rescue. The silence that enveloped the space was infinite, a powerful tranquility after the storm of jeers and hatred. The sunset was gradually descending, painting Leo's mane and Mara's face red. Leo slowly opened his eyes. He did not see the sky, nor his enemies, but only the familiar silhouette of his mate standing guard, protecting him. All tension in his body melted away, replaced by a profound relief and security. He was saved. Mara stepped closer to her king. She did not reproach or judge him for his failure. She simply bowed down, gently licking his wounds, his dusty mane, like a final act of comfort. It was the language of nature, of wordless acceptance. Then, she performed the greatest act of respect. She placed a small piece of meat, a trophy from her meager hunt, right before Leo's nose. This was not an offering for life, but a silent farewell. It was her way of saying, "You are still my king. You will not die from hunger or humiliation." The meat lay there, a symbol of sacrifice and loyalty. Leo could not eat. He only gently touched the meat with his nose, a soft gesture of gratitude and final acceptance. He looked at Mara, his eyes filled with everything he could not roar. He lowered his head for the last time, now truly at peace. Protected by the one creature whose loyalty never wavered, Leo took his last breath. As the stars began to rise over the Savanna sky, Leo, the once magnificent king, passed away in the embrace of love, granted a dignified end. The truth of this story is, Leo's surrender was not defeat. It was an act of absolute weakness, but that very weakness called forth the deepest bond he had ever created. When the world judges you by your fading strength, the gentle solution is often one. Find the Mara in your life. Find the one who sees your true worth, not your deep scars. Find the one who is willing to stand between you and the harshness of fate, not with violence, but with fierce and enduring love. If this story has moved you, if you believe in the power of loyalty that transcends all circumstances, please hit the like button and share this story. Have you ever been protected by unexpected loyalty? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more stories of hope and connection in the wild next week. Sunrise on the edge of Kruger National Park is usually a symphony of silence, punctuated by the distant calls of the wild. Jack, a former park ranger who had chosen a life of seclusion to heal old wounds, was familiar with every sound of the land. But this morning, he was woken by an unfamiliar bark from Max, his loyal German shepherd. It wasn't the powerful territorial warning Max reserved for passing lions. It was a short, urgent, pleading sound, laced with anxiety, that pierced straight through Jack's heart. His pulse racing, Jack sprang out of bed and rushed to the door, operating on pure instinct. The sight that met him at the small wooden gate brought Jack to a stunned halt. Standing in the soft, golden light of dawn was Max, and beside him, an astonishingly vulnerable creature, a baby elephant. It barely reached Jack's knee, dew-kissed, covered in the fine red dust of the South African savanna, and trembling on stick-like, spindly legs. Its oversized ears drooped with exhaustion, and its deep, sunken brown eyes looked straight into Jack's with a desperate, silent question. This tiny calf, perhaps no more than 3 months old, was completely alone. Tracing the faint tracks in the sand, Jack knew Max had done more than just find it. Max had brought it home. In that moment, Jack, still mending from the losses of his past, made a life-altering decision. He would not let it die. He looked at Max, then at the calf, and whispered the name that would link their fates. Keto. The first 48 hours were a chaotic blur of emergency care and deep emotional observation. Keto was severely dehydrated. Jack, drawing on his old ranger knowledge, knew he needed professional help immediately. He called the nearest wildlife sanctuary, but was told their rescue vehicle was grounded and couldn't arrive soon. Everything now depended entirely on Jack and his ability to improvise. He rushed inside for water, mixing a basic electrolyte formula from what he had, diluted cow's milk, and a hint of honey. But Keto's greatest challenge was not physical. It was winning the trust of a terrified, orphaned wild animal. This is where Max stepped in, becoming an accidental emotional anchor. When Jack brought the bucket of water, Keto flinched back, its huge ears flapping in distress. Max, sensing the calf's extreme fear, slowly approached the bucket, took a long, exaggerated drink, then looked back at Keto as if to say, "Trust me, it's clean, it's safe, it's okay." Keto watched every movement, and driven by a powerful survival instinct, it slowly moved forward, watching its tiny, clumsy trunk fail to draw water, forcing it to lower its head and drink directly from the mouth. Water spilling down its cheeks was a heartbreaking image of the calf's struggle. After drinking, Keto collapsed from exhaustion. Max did not hesitate. He lay down beside Keto, his warm body pressed against the calf's cold, shivering frame. acting as a living shield against the wind and chill. This simple act, an unconditional gift of warmth and solace, was the moment their friendship solidified. Later, when Jack returned with a makeshift milk formula, Max carefully sniffed the nipple, as if checking for safety, then turned to gently lick Keto's ear. The soft reassurance worked its magic. Keto, with a mixture of hesitation and absolute trust in Max, slowly got to its feet and eagerly gulped down the first warm sips of milk. Jack knelt on the warm Kruger soil, witnessing something extraordinary, a system of comfort that transcended species boundaries, driven by compassion rather than blood. Max was teaching Keto how to feel safe in a world that had just stolen everything from him. They were two wounded souls, Jack grieving his past losses, Keto grieving his family, finding a path back to hope through each other. This bond, both fragile and mighty, was forming on the quiet boundary of the Kruger, proving that true love does not need to be of the same kind to flourish. Jack knew that while the vet might be late, Keto now had an irreplaceable protector. The following days settled into a new rhythm, entirely revolving around Keto's needs. Morning walks on Jack's small property became a daily ritual. Jack led, Keto followed on increasingly steady legs, and Max raced back and forth, self-appointed scout and bodyguard. Keto grew at a staggering rate, adding several kilograms each day, demanding more milk, more grass, and more attention. But the most miraculous development was its emotional and cognitive connection to Max. Keto learned by observing Max. Initially, its trunk was clumsy, spraying water everywhere. But after only a few days, by mimicking Max's actions, it mastered the complex maneuver of sucking up water and expertly squirting it into its mouth. Their communication evolved into a private language. Max's soft whimpers of encouragement, Keto's low rumbles of acknowledgement and affection. Max's devotion was absolute. When a pack of lean wild dogs strayed too close to the boundary, Max stood his ground, barking with protective fury and authority, ensuring Keto remained safely tucked away. The moment the threat retreated, Keto rushed out, making anxious, squealing sounds, and gently stroked Max's face and the small scratches on his leg with his trunk. It wasn't just instinct. It was a reciprocity of care, an act demonstrating profound gratitude. One sweltering afternoon, Jack witnessed a beautiful moment that encapsulated their unique relationship. Max was panting in the heat under the sun. Keto, having finished its pile of hay, sucked a full trunk of water and, with surprising accuracy, sprayed it over Max's back to cool him down. Another time, it carefully swept a pile of dry leaves over the sleeping Max, tucking him in like a blanket. Jack captured the moment on camera, a silent testament to their definition of family. When Dr. Theron and animal behaviorist Lena from the sanctuary finally arrived, they brought all their skepticism and scientific equipment. But within minutes, the cameras and questions became unnecessary. They watched Max and Keto play. Max feigning attacks, Keto gently pushing with its trunk, and understood. This bond was too special to break. The experts agreed to extend the trial period. Jack would continue Keto's care, under their supervision, prioritizing the strength of this extraordinary friendship. Jack and Max were given an unexpected purpose, anchoring a new life for them both on the edge of the wild. Months passed. Keto, now over a meter tall and weighing several hundred kilograms, was a picture of health. But alongside its physical growth, its wild instincts began to assert themselves. Keto spent more time standing still, its large ears pointed west, toward the deep wilderness of Kruger National Park. At night, its soft, curious rumbles began to turn into deep, resonating calls, the long-distance communication sound of elephants seeking their kin. The call of nature was growing louder. Max noticed the change, too. Now older, he was not as fast as he once was, but his protective devotion was even fiercer. The bond between them had deepened into a silent, intuitive understanding. They were preparing for a separation that had not yet been announced. Then the news came from Dr. Theron and Lena. They had found a perfect match. A herd deep inside the Kruger had an adult female elephant, Mama Vesta, who had recently lost a calf and was showing strong signs of wanting to adopt. The plan was gently laid out. Keto would be moved to a semi-wild enclosure near Mama Vesta's herd for observation and gradual integration. The 2-week countdown began, bringing a sweet and agonizing sorrow to Jack's heart. He knew this was the right choice for Keto's full future, but logic and emotion were two entirely separate things. Jack and Max cherished their final days. Max refused to sleep anywhere, but curled up tightly next to Keto in the stable, as if to memorize its every scent and move. The morning of the separation arrived too quickly, heavy with silence. The large transport truck from the sanctuary was waiting. Jack led Keto out, with Max faithfully walking beside them. But as they approached the ramp, Keto stopped. Its trunk recoiled, its ears drooped, a clear expression of distress. It wrapped its trunk around Max, refusing to step into the unfamiliar without its protector. Jack knelt, placing his hand on Keto's head and hugging Max tightly. He knew prolonging the moment would only make the parting harder. He had to be strong. With determined resolve, he stepped into the container first, followed by Max, to prove its safety. Slowly, hesitantly, Keto climbed aboard. But when Jack and Max stepped out and the shield slammed shut, Keto's true panic erupted. It let out a deep, mournful call of distress, the sound of separation. Max lunged at the metal door, barking and scratching desperately. The moment of letting go, the true climax of the story, had arrived. Jack had to make the ultimate sacrifice of love, giving Keto the freedom it deserved, even if it shattered his own heart. The first week without Keto was a time of deep silence and profound grief. Max barely ate, lying motionless on the pile of dry leaves where Keto used to cover him. Jack felt the emptiness in the house acutely, but he held onto the promise of a reunion. He knew he had to be strong for Max, just as Max had been strong for Keto. A week later, they drove together to the semi-wild enclosure. Lena greeted them with the wonderful news. Keto had successfully bonded with Mama Vesta, his adoptive mother. When Max saw Keto through the enclosure's chain-link fence, he barked a sharp, joyful sound. Not a warning, but the call of recognition. Keto raised its head, and in that instant, its eyes found Max. It let out a rumble, the low, loving greeting they had heard hundreds of times, and ran toward them with the full might of its massive body. Max and Keto pressed against the metal fence, trunk and nose touching through the mesh. They stood like that for minutes, a dog and an elephant, separated by a physical barrier, but unified by a heart without borders. Jack and Max spent the entire afternoon telling Keto everything, its trunk never far from them. But then, the deep, maternal rumble of Mama Vesta sounded from the bush. Keto turned, looked at its new herd, and then back at Jack and Max. It was pulled in two directions, the love of its first family and the powerful, natural call of destiny. Jack knelt down one last time. "Go, Keto," he whispered. "They are waiting for you. We will always be here. It's time for you to live your wild life." Keto touched them both with its trunk once more, a gentle, knowing touch, then slowly walked toward Mama Vesta. The large female embraced it with her trunk, welcoming it home. Jack and Max stood by the fence watching, hearts heavy but filled with a quiet joy. Keto had found the freedom it deserved. 2 years later, Jack's home has now become a small educational center, sharing the extraordinary story of Max and Keto. They still visit Keto once a month. Keto is now almost 2 meters tall, a strong, fully integrated member of the Kruger herd. Yet, when Max barks or Jack calls, it still runs to the boundary fence. They don't need much. They just sit there, Max lying in the shade, Keto standing tall, its trunk reaching across to touch them. This story is a testament that family is defined by the bonds we choose to create, not the species we belong to. Max didn't just save an elephant. He brought hope and purpose back to a man who thought he had lost everything. If you believe in the power of connection and the miracles of the wild, please share this story. Support the funds that work tirelessly to give these orphan creatures a second chance. They showed us that true love never truly lets go. It only changes form, growing stronger across every boundary. Hit subscribe to see more stories of hope from the African bush. The brilliant yellow light of the African dawn spread over Kenya's Ol Pejeta Conservancy, carrying the familiar stillness of the savannah. But today, a sound pierced the peace, a whimper, thin and heartbreaking, unlike the usual hunting calls. Ranger Jack, who had devoted his life to protecting this land, was on patrol in his aging Land Rover. He was a weathered man, but his heart belonged to the creatures here. That cry, which sounded like pure despair, brought him to a halt. Following the sound through the thorny acacia bushes, Jack found a heartbreaking sight. It was a lion cub, perhaps 7 or 8 months old, severely emaciated and clearly malnourished. They called him Leo. Though exhausted, Leo's golden eyes burned with a raw intensity, accompanied by tiny, primal snarls as Jack approached. Leo was clutching an object, an old, tattered black nylon bag, pressed tight against his stomach. The animal used every bit of his remaining trembling strength to guard the flimsy plastic, ready to fight to his last breath. Jack had witnessed many wilderness tragedies, but this desperate clinging to a worthless object was bizarre, almost insane. He understood. This was not trash nor prey. It was something more sacred. What secret could be more precious than life itself to a starving predator? This cub wasn't clinging to hope. He was clinging to a memory. This was not just a rescue mission. It was a journey to find the answer to a broken heart. Leo's desperation made Jack realize he could not handle this alone. He quickly contacted Dr. Lena Hansen, an American veterinarian specializing in predator rehabilitation at a nearby reserve. Lena arrived within minutes, her eyes filled with bewilderment as she witnessed the scene. A starving cub dedicating all its energy to protecting a dirty nylon bag. They both agreed they couldn't leave Leo. He was too weak, and this obvious suffering required immediate intervention. The capture was incredibly difficult and inherently dangerous. Jack and Lena had to coordinate their strategy gently. Jack played the role of distraction, moving slowly and speaking in a calm voice. Meanwhile, Lena prepared a low-dose tranquilizer dart, ensuring Leo was sedated with minimal stress. Leo recognized the threat. His snarls escalated to furious roars, but he never lunged at them. All his focus was on the black bag. As the tranquilizer began to take effect, Leo fought the drowsiness. It was a final, frantic effort to hold onto the bag, leading to a short but agonizing struggle. Finally, as Leo succumbed to a deep sleep, Jack quickly, but carefully, pried the black nylon bag from his claws. The moment the bag was gone, the expression on Leo's sleeping face was one of profound loss, almost utter despair. After Leo was safely secured in a transport cage and headed to the clinic, Jack and Lena were finally able to examine the mysterious bag. It was heavier than it looked, tied shut with a mud-caked piece of rope. Lena used a scalpel to gently slice it open. They expected an old bone, or perhaps a discarded item from poachers. What tumbled out onto the dry earth made both of them freeze. It was a small, strange pile of dozens of leather collars in various colors and tiny metal tags. Each tag was crudely stamped with a number 01, 02, 03, and so on. The truth struck them like a physical blow. Leo hadn't been protecting trash. He had been guarding the tangible evidence of a relationship, of a past. The astonishment peaked when they examined Leo's neck, hidden beneath his sparse mane. He was wearing a single, well-worn leather collar. The small tag on it read, 34. Jack and Lena looked at each other, silently grasping the terrifying realization. This bag contained the story of an unspeakable loss. Jack immediately recognized the initials stamped on the back of the small metal tags, A.K. Amani Caprati. Amani was a former elder known for his compassion. Jack and Lena drove to Amani's modest homestead. Amani was initially confused. Then his face crumpled when he saw the black nylon bag and the pile of collars. He began to weep uncontrollably. He explained that a few months prior, Leo had been orphaned as a newborn cub during a massive storm. Amani, unable to let the fragile creature die, had brought him home and raised him alongside his dogs and goats.
Leo.
He named him Leo. Leo grew up believing he was part of the dog pack, protected and loved. He slept with the dogs, learned to play, and tried to purr like a cat. Amani explained, the collars were his sacred tradition, the bag of memories. Every animal he had ever loved and lost had a collar stored there, numbered in order. Amani continued, Leo had always been keenly aware of loss. Zola, Amani's oldest and dearest dog, who had also been Leo's surrogate mother, had passed away 3 weeks ago. Zola was Leo's inseparable companion. Amani had buried Zola near the edge of the conservancy. The next day, Leo vanished, and the bag of memories was gone. He didn't run away. Amani sobbed. He took his family with him. He was clinging to the only thing left of Zola, of all of them. He was guarding the graves. Despite the story being steeped in love, Lena and Jack had to confront the harsh reality of law and biology. They gently explained to Amani, Leo was a fast-growing lion cub. His fierce attachment to humans and his lack of innate fear meant he could not be released into the wild. He would not know how to hunt effectively and would become a danger to himself as he matured. Furthermore, continuing to harbor a large predator was illegal and unsafe for both Amani and the community. Amani sat in silence. He sighed, the grief evident in his eyes. He accepted the truth quietly. I knew this day would come, he said softly. I was just a lonely old man trying to hold on to a miracle. But I was wrong to keep him. Lena stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. You gave Leo love, which is what saved him from death. But now we have to save him again by giving him back his wild nature. Lena presented the solution. Leo would be transferred to the Safe Haven Sanctuary in South Africa, a specialized facility for psychologically imprinted predators. It was not a cramped zoo, but a massive, natural habitat where Leo would receive lifelong care and, most importantly, be exposed to other rescued lions. He would have the chance to learn his species' social behavior, to eventually learn how to be a real lion. Will he be happy? Amani asked, his eyes seeking assurance. He will be safe, Lena replied firmly. He will have the best care, and he will be understood. We're giving him a home worthy of his nature. Amani nodded slowly, a decisive but painful gesture. All right, is the right thing for him. He had one final request. He took the black nylon bag from Jack. At the clinic, Leo was sleeping in a recovery cage after his medical check and 4 fluids. Amani approached and placed the bag right next to the mesh, near the sleeping animal's head. Just so he knows he is not alone, he whispered, until he gets home. In the days that followed, waiting for the complex international transfer procedures, Amani's home was steeped in silence. Jack and Lena worked tirelessly to prepare for Leo's
The cage mechanism is secure.
Every action they took demonstrated
okay,
deep
little
respect
one.
for
You're safe
both
now.
Amani
Just
and
rest.
Leo, ensuring the transfer was humane and absolutely safe. They knew this was not just about moving an animal, but about reshaping the life of a creature caught between two worlds. Finally, after a long week of quiet anticipation, everything was ready. Leo had been safely transported to the Safe Haven Sanctuary in South Africa, a vast expanse of juniper trees and open sky. On a cool, clear morning, Lena's green truck pulled up to Amani's home. Leo is ready for visitors, Amani, she smiled. If you are ready for the drive. The trip lasted 2 hours, cutting across arid scrubland where vast conservancies bled into the rocky landscape. The sanctuary director, Dr. Eva Rusta, met them. Leo is an incredible animal, she said. Very cautious, very gentle, and he's particularly fascinated by the other lions in the adjacent enclosures. She led them to Leo's main enclosure, a spacious 3-acre plot complete with rocks, trees, and sun. Initially, Amani couldn't see Leo. He's up on the high rock, Dr. Rusta pointed out. It's his favorite spot. And there was Leo. He was magnificent. His coat was clean, wind brushed, thick and shining. His muscles were powerful. He looked wild. He looked like he belonged. Amani walked slowly to the wire mesh fence. He didn't call Leo. That name belonged to another life. He just stood and watched. After a long while, the lion moved. He was looking out over the savannah. Then his tufted ears rotated slightly, and he turned his head. He looked down and saw the old man standing by the fence. He didn't startle, but recognized. Leo began to walk. He moved with a graceful power Amani had never seen when he was on his porch. He didn't run. He just strode. Leo stopped about half a meter from the fence. His golden eyes locked onto Amani's cloudy blue ones. He was no longer the desperate, suffering creature. He was a lion, confident and calm. "Hello, son," Amani whispered, his hand resting lightly on the wire mesh. Leo looked at him. He made no sound for a moment, then emitted a soft, deep chuff, the sound he used to make when he wanted his breakfast years before. He stepped right up to the fence. He turned his head and, in one perfect moment, pressed his broad forehead against the wire mesh, right where Amani's fingers were resting. It wasn't a house cat rub, but a gesture of final, silent, meaningful acknowledgement. Then he stepped back, looked at Amani for one more second, and turned away. With a powerful, easy leap, he bounded onto the rock face, disappearing from view. Amani stood there. Tears streamed down his face, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. "He is well," Amani whispered, his eyes fixed on the empty rock. "He is home. He is finally home." He stepped back from the fence, taking one last look at the wild, beautiful space that held a piece of his heart. He had lost his strange wild cat, but he had truly given him the one thing his love couldn't, his own world. Leo's story reminds us that love has infinite power. If you want to continue following moving stories, hopeful rescues, and gentle revelations about the natural world, please hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the magic we share. Your support helps us spread light and faith. The sun was beginning to climb high over South Africa's vast Kruger National Park, casting a brilliant, shimmering gold across the sweeping savanna. This was the kingdom of Anya, a ranger who had dedicated her young adulthood to preserving the fragile balance of this ecosystem. Anya's job was a blend of routine patrols and potentially dangerous standoffs, checking for poacher traps, monitoring migrating herds, and ensuring everything remained under control. The most basic and unforgiving safety rule was always etched into her mind: never leave the vehicle when large predators are near. It was the law of survival. But this morning, a sudden, entirely unpredictable sight shattered all the rules. Standing in the middle of the dusty track, in the bright daylight, was a majestic lioness. Her posture was tense, but her usual ferocity was replaced by an intense, focused anxiety. She stared directly at Anya's approaching vehicle. Anya slowed down, reaching for her binoculars. She recognized her instantly. Nala, a familiar mother lion who frequented this area. Nala did not growl, but instead emitted a low, desperate sound. Not a territorial warning, but a plaintive whimper of distress. The sound cut through the vehicle's shell and froze Anya's heart. The mother lion approached the car cautiously, nudging her muzzle gently against the tire, and then immediately turned, focusing her gaze and head towards a nearby thicket. The gesture was unmistakable. This powerful queen of the savannah was not threatening. She was pleading for help. In that moment, Anya's 10 years of rule following collided with a primal, universal truth, the cry of a mother in distress. A powerful surge of adrenaline shot down Anya's spine. This was a moment of fierce separation between logic and instinct. She quickly radioed base, not for immediate backup, but to log the situation. "I have a lioness, ID Nala, exhibiting highly unusual, soliciting behavior. She is guiding me towards a high-risk area." She whispered into the mic. Anya's heart pounded against her ribs. She knew the risks. A split-second misunderstanding could cost her life. Yet, Nala held her steady gaze, a silent promise imprinted in her amber eyes. She patiently waited for Anya's decision. In the end, it was the deep connection Anya felt for these creatures that won out. She trusted the instinctive desperation she saw, keeping her dart gun and satellite radio close. Anya took a deep breath and stepped out of the vehicle, slowly, deliberately, her boots crunching on the dry asphalt. Nala immediately began to lead the way, not running, but walking at a purposeful, measured pace along the roadside. Anya maintained a safe but reactive distance. The air was thick with tension. Every shadow, every rustle of the foliage seemed to hold a hidden danger. As they moved deeper into the thicket-heavy area, Anya realized she was being led to a spot notorious for human activity, specifically where discarded snare wire and netting from poachers were often left behind. With subtle movements, Nala communicated everything. Periodically, she would stop, look back to ensure Anya was following, then glance down at the ground and back at Anya. It was a silent map of need. This unique partnership, the savanna's most fearsome predator trusting a ranger, was a powerful testament to the bond that can form when respect overcomes the species barrier. The further they walked, the more Anya's skepticism dissolved, replaced by fierce resolve. She was no longer just a ranger. She was the answer to a mother's urgent prayer. They left the main track and entered a small, out-of-sight depression in the land. The air changed. It was cooler, damper, and carried a faint, unpleasant smell of old material. Anya braced herself for the worst. Knowing this was where the ugly remnants of the anti-poaching war often lurked. Nala stopped abruptly, her low, continuous whine finally focusing on one specific point, a dense, broken dry bush. Anya could see the signs. Branches violently snapped, dull, white nylon shards glinting among the dry leaves. Nala turned to look at Anya one last time, her eyes full of pleading. She understood. It was no longer safe to wait or call for help. She had to face her fear and act immediately, for the life of the cub lay in her hands. The sight that greeted Anya confirmed her fears, yet justified the heartbreaking urgency of Nala's plea. Nestled in the small hollow was a tragic tableau of human carelessness and cruelty, a horrific tangle of old nylon fishing nets, coarse ropes, and sharp branches, all discarded and left to become an inhuman, lethal snare. This was the painful, indirect damage of the anti-poaching war. Mindless debris turned into serial killers. And right in the middle of the chaotic trap, small and trembling, was Nala's cub, Keto. Keto was only a few months old, a pitiful mass of golden fuzz, now trapped and helpless. His tiny body was tightly bound by heavy rope strands, a cruel cinching belt around his chest, and one back leg was tightly twisted, pulled taut. The old fishing net, tough and unforgiving, clung to his neck and shoulders, an invisible collar that tightened every struggle. The cub was exhausted, his tiny cries almost inaudible, his large eyes wide with fear that melted Anya's heart. His fur was matted with dirt, and small streaks of blood marked where the nylon had cut into his tender flesh. Nala, the magnificent queen, now stood back, her body trembling, her eyes glued to Anya. She was entrusting everything to this woman. This was the ultimate test of faith. Anya whispered reassurances to Nala, and then, ever so slowly, approached the snared cub. She noted the details. The rope was too tight. The nylon net had to be cut carefully to avoid injuring Keto. Anya withdrew her specialized field knife. She had to work quickly, but with absolute precision. The presence of the mother made every cut a life-or-death decision. She used her body to shield the cub slightly, positioning herself carefully. The first cuts were difficult. The nylon was surprisingly tough. As she worked, Keto, in his terror, tried instinctively to nip at her glove, but Anya persisted, her focus unwavering. She gently and firmly cut the last strand of the restrictive rope binding his leg. The silent struggle lasted an eternity. Anya felt the intense heat of the sun on her neck and the acute tension radiating from Nala in the distance. She knew she had only one chance. If Nala misinterpreted any action as a threat, it would be over. But Nala remained, just watching, just waiting. Her trust was Anya's greatest burden and her strongest motivation. She carefully removed the last piece of netting, freeing the final limb. With one final, clean, decisive cut, the dense nylon netting fell away from Keto's neck. The cub, stunned for a moment, then burst into a flurry of life. Anya immediately retreated, backing away several meters, her eyes still locked on Nala. The release was instantaneous and profoundly emotional. Keto, now free, stumbled on his numb legs, then bolted towards his mother. Nala met him halfway, dipping her head low. She did not roar in triumph or attack. She simply rubbed her head gently against Keto, licking his dusty fur with her rough tongue, checking him for injuries. It was a moment of pure, cross-species maternal relief. Anya stood watching, her chest tight with emotion, tears blurring her vision. She had risked her life, not in confrontation, but in an act of pure empathy, and now she was witnessing the reward. And then, the most extraordinary moment came. After a minute of checking her cub, Nala slowly raised her head. She looked directly at Anya. The previous strained, pleading energy was gone, replaced by a profound stillness. Nala took a few steps towards where Anya stood. She did not approach too closely, but stopped about 3 meters away. Nala slowly dipped her massive head once, a deliberate gesture, a universal nod of thanks. It was a moment of profound, wordless communication. In the heart of the wild, the queen acknowledged the debt. Anya met her gaze, a genuine, heartfelt smile breaking across her face. This was the reward for her dangerous, quiet work. This was why she stayed. Nala turned, nudged Keto, and the pair melted into the brush, leaving behind the cut strands of poacher rope and netting. The silence that settled was no longer tense, but restorative, peaceful. Anya knew that, in a world full of cruelty and indifference, she had just experienced a small miracle of trust and connection. She had been accepted by a wild creature, and she had saved an innocent life. Her mission now was not just conservation, but honoring the promise established in that moment. Anya returned to her vehicle, her hands slightly shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline and raw emotion of the experience. She radioed in the successful rescue and marked the precise coordinates of the discarded snare materials so a cleanup team could handle them immediately. Saving one life was crucial, but preventing similar traps was an unmissable duty. The encounter with Nala was not just a rescue. It was a powerful message. It smashed the wall between humans and the wild. This was not a tamed animal. This was a proud wild creature that had seen an ally, a human, a protector, and chosen to place its most precious hope in her hands. It proved that the deepest human emotion, compassion, is mirrored in the wild world through motherly love. Anya leaned back in her seat, looking out to where Nala and Keto had disappeared. Her face was weary but serene. Anya knew that the work she and her colleagues did was a constant struggle, a race against time, against indifference and greed. The story of Nala and Keto was the clearest proof of why they had to keep fighting. The power of life and love, even in the animal kingdom, is infinite, and it deserves to be protected at all costs. This story is a reminder that the war against poaching is not just about grand statistics. It is about one life, one family, one moment of connection. We are not nature's enemies. We could be its guardians. If you have been inspired and believe in the power of compassion, help us spread this message. Have you ever witnessed a moment of unexpected love or connection with a wild animal? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next touching and humane stories about wildlife. Click the share button and send this video to your friends so the story of the lion mother Nala's trust can reach millions of hearts around the world.